1985 is starting off with a bang, or maybe a pop. The thing is, I don't just find Balloon Fight to be pretty good. Balloon Fight is one of my favorite Famicom games. The story goes that Satoru Iwata programmed a version of Joust to sell HAL Labs' programming abilities for the Famicom. They got the job, but not the license, and so that version of Joust was reworked into the clearly inspired by, but still substantially different, Balloon Fight. Eventually, HAL would obtain licenses to several popular Williams arcade games, including Joust, but we've got a while before we see those ports. In Balloon Fight, you strap a pair of balloons to your back and take to the skies. Those balloons aren't enough to overcome your weight, though. You're getting constantly pulled down, and so you'll have to flap to give yourself a little bit more of a boost upward. Pressing A once gives you a small boost, and holding down B flaps continuously. You can move faster by pressing A rapidly, but in general I found that just using B is sufficient to give you the control you need. You've got a lot of momentum, and it's really only gravity that slows you down. So you'll need to flap to control your direction, accelerate and brake. People have told me they find Balloon Fight hard to control, but I never had a problem with it. In games A and B, your goal on each stage is to knock the birds out of the sky. You have to get above them and collide with their balloons. That makes them parachute down, and if you collide with them again, they'll fall down into the water. Any bird that's come to rest on a surface can just be kicked off, but they'll reinflate their balloon. The stages start with none of the balloons inflated for the birds, and so you have an opportunity to knock a few off before they get moving. There's 3 levels of birds: pink balloons, green balloons, and white balloons, and they get more aggressive with each. I do have trouble telling the pink balloons apart from the white balloons, even on a CRT though. When a bird's been kicked into the water, a bubble rises up from where they were knocked in, and that bubble can be collected for some extra points. The stage ends as soon as you kick over the last bird though, so you can never collect its bubble. Patrolling the waters at the bottom of the screen is a fish, and anyone who gets too close, player or bird, can get devoured by it instantly. Another complication comes from the clouds, which launch lightning bolts periodically that bounce around the edges of the screen. Don't overlook that you can go off the left-hand side of the screen and come back in on the right. It's a vital tactic for you to get one up on the birds, and it's something that the birds can use to come after you. There are 12 level patterns that the game runs through before it starts repeating, although it doesn't go all the way back to stage 1 when it repeats. You have 2 balloons rather than 1, so you can collide with the birds once before falling into the water. Having 1 balloon, though, does mean you have to flap harder to get around. Every few stages there's a bonus stage where balloons emerge from a pipe, and if you collect them all you get a large amount of bonus points. If you are down to 1 balloon, reaching one of these bonus stages gives you the second balloon back. One thing you'll notice about Balloon Fight is that there are no extra lives. No extra life for clearing the bonus stage, no extra life for getting enough points. You have 3 lives, and that's it. The 2-player game is simultaneous, and players can pop each other's balloons. Game C is Balloon Trip. There are no enemies. Your only goal is to see how far you can go in a randomly spawning field of stars. The first couple screens have a set pattern, and then after that they spawn randomly and move up and down, and then after you clear that wave of stars, they gain some lateral movement. If you collect 20 balloons without any balloon going off the right-hand side of the screen, the balloons change color and become worth more points. You can do that twice. If you do it further, you still get the chime when you do it, but no additional points. Because the stars are randomly spawned, sometimes it can be pretty difficult to find your way through them. Grabbing a bubble stops the screen's forward movement, and if the stars are moving, it freezes them in place as well. That gives you more time to collect any balloons that are on screen, but more likely you'll just be waiting for the screen to start moving again. The thing that makes Balloon Fight special, I think, is that it controls so smoothly. The way that your momentum shifts as you flap feels very natural. If you try to go fast, you'll probably go out of control, bouncing off surfaces and flying into the birds. A careful, measured flapping will let you keep control and make it through some of those tight gaps. Balloon Fight was Iwata's favorite game that he worked on, and as a result, it has a tendency to keep coming up in Nintendo products. It got a very good port to arcades as Versus Balloon Fight, and extremely late in the Famicom's life, there was a sequel. Kind of. It really is a sequel. We're at the end of an era here. Balloon Fight is the final single-screen arcade game that Nintendo is going to release. Nintendo's development efforts have changed focus. Balloon Fight makes a pretty good last hurrah for that style of game. So this is my 30th video, and I hope that by this point I've made it clear that I really do like old arcade games. I get a lot of enjoyment out of them. I'm saying that to make it clear that it's not a knee-jerk reaction when I go, I hate Ice Climbers. I find playing it to be like pulling teeth. It's a miserable slog of a game to play that's only better than Urban Champion because it has a germ of a good idea in it. Ice Climbers features the parka-wearing Popo and Nana climbing a mountain. They'll have to jump up between levels, possibly smashing the ice blocks above them to make a hole. The denizens of the mountains try to knock them down. The seals are topi. They were replaced in the US versions by a kind of fuzzy monster. The seals emerge from one side and crawl along the floor until they find a gap. Then they go back to get an ice block to fill it in. Attacking from the air are the Nitopika. Based on the names from the manual, these are the same birds that you'd find in Donkey Kong Jr. They don't have any particular attacks, they just sort of flap around. If you linger too long on a floor, a polar bear may emerge. He walks to the center of the screen and then jumps. That knocks the mountain down a level. Nana and Popo deal with these enemies by whacking them with their hammer. They can swing it to the side, or they extend it as they jump. Each mountain has 8 floors that have to be climbed, and then you reach the bonus stage. At the bonus stage, your goal is to collect all the vegetables and then emerge at the top of the mountain. Grab onto the condor to complete the bonus. If you fall down in the bonus stage, it doesn't matter. You don't lose a life, you just continue on to the next mountain. There are 32 mountains in all, and you can select which mountain you start on from the main menu. It's similar to how Hudson handled their large puzzle games. There is one difference that occurs when you start from a later mountain. The vegetables in the bonus stage indicate how many levels you've cleared. There's 10 different vegetables in all, and the further you go, the more points that they're worth. Okay, the game's explained. Now let me get into why I hate Ice Climbers so much. If you've played Ice Climbers before, you can make a pretty good guess. The big problem is that the controls are terrible. This isn't a matter of platforming as a genre not really being developed yet, or Ice Climbers following in the footsteps of other earlier games like Donkey Kong, where the jumping isn't quite mechanically there yet. These controls are bad in a way that it actively harms the game. A good example of this, and something that you see in poorly designed platformers to this day, is the priority on the movement. This mostly shows up when you're trying to move on the conveyor belts or the moving platforms. Your steps and jumps don't behave consistently while you're on them. Another related problem with the controls is that there's input lag. If you push in the opposite direction that you're facing and hit jump, sometimes just the jump will go off. The game is resolving the jump input at a higher priority rather than dealing with all of the inputs simultaneously. Then there's that high arc to the jump. That's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but the game often puts you in situations where you have to jump up to the next ledge, and the arc doesn't carry you quite right. If there's a wall beside you, you're more likely to bounce off the wall than be able to jump up. A common problem with all of this is that the platforms don't reflect the graphics. You have a bad tendency to jump through things. Occasionally this works out in your favor when you jump through something from below, but more often you wind up missing your jump and falling. Between inconsistent jumping mechanics and the platforms not really matching their graphics, it makes Ice Climbers platforming a miserable experience. Nintendo hasn't gone back to Ice Climbers very often. There was a release on the Famicom Disk System for the rewriter, and Versus Ice Climbers did make it to the arcades. And we're kind of at the end of the line for Nintendo arcade games too. There will be a couple more Versus system ports, but this is Nintendo's last pass at something that's really a score attack game. The next year is going to bring big changes for Nintendo, and games like Ice Climbers get left behind. Look at my poor Exerion cart. Shortly after I bought it, it fell from a table onto my hardwood floor and that cracked off. When I decided to start this project, I tried to get another copy, but somebody bought the cheap one that I found. To the person who bought that $2 copy of Exerion in early December 2020, I hope you enjoyed it. There aren't a lot of us Famicom collectors in the US, and I never feel bad missing out on something like that, knowing it's going to someone else who's in the same boat. And I know it went to a collector because there's no other reason anyone would bother buying a copy of Exerion. Exerion brings a new major third-party publisher to the Famicom. This is Jaleco's first game for the system, and don't hold its quality against them. There's a few major publishers we're going to see that released some pretty terrible games in 1985, but then by the end of the Famicom's life are making some of the best. Not everybody can hit the ground running like Namco did. This is also our first encounter with Tosei in this project. The mercenary development house is going to be responsible for a lot of terrible things on the system. Exerion started out as an arcade shooter, and it was mainly notable for its kind of impressive for 1983 graphics. This is actually Exerion's second console port. It was also an early title for Sega's SG-1000. In the US, Nintendo forced licensees to not port games to other systems. But in 1985, those were things that were still being worked out. Before I get into the Famicom game, I need to talk a moment about the packaging. Jaleco chose to manufacture their own cartridges, and so they have their logo molded into the plastic. The back of Jaleco cartridges are kind of neat. They have the instructions on how to play. Finally, let's take a really good look at that label. Despite what's on the label and the box, there are no F-14 Tomcats fighting mechanical space dragons in this game. Strip away the fancy backgrounds, and Exerion is a single-screen shooter in the mold of Galaxian. The enemy ships in this case just don't go into formation. This is one of the few times in the early Famicom days where the manual gives us a story. In Universal Century 2991, the 6th planet Exerion of Blue Galaxy CP-17 Zenith was attacked by the once friendly 7th planet Zorni. To defeat them, the Exerions build a state-of-the-art spaceship called Fighter EX. Look, I never said it was much of a story, just that they had a story. There's two methods of attack in the game. Pressing the B button fires 2 shots at once, but you can only fire one of those attacks at a time. Pressing the A button fires a single beam, but it's a rapid-fire shot. The rapid fire cannon has limited ammo, but you gain one shot for every enemy you shoot down. So if you're a real sharpshooter, you could use the rapid shot exclusively. What you'll probably want to do, though, is use the double shot early on to build up some ammo, and then break out the rapid shot when you're dealing with masses of erratically moving enemies. And speaking of being a sharpshooter, the score for every enemy that you shoot down increases the longer that you do not miss a shot. The really memorable thing about Exerion is the control scheme. I get what they were trying to do with it. Your ship in Exerion has a lot of inertia to it, so it slowly accelerates when you push in a direction, and slowly decelerates when you let it go. That might have worked, except the enemies and their shots don't move in the same way that your ship does. When you push to the edge of the screen with the ship, you're clearly scrolling things, but the shots stay exactly on course. You can wind up effectively fixed in place when it looks like you're moving. I found it easier to dodge shots moving vertically than horizontally. The inertia isn't quite so bad with those. And that movement makes Exerion extremely difficult to play. If you were to just pop in a cartridge or pick a ROM out of a list and try this, my guess is you'd die in 30 seconds and then give up on the game immediately. Enemies in Exerion come in waves of 8. If you kill all of them, the next wave continues, but also if you die, you automatically go on to the next wave. There's 4 waves of enemies per stage, and on the final wave, a 3-headed dragon flies in to shoot at you. It only takes 1 shot to kill it, so it's not really a boss, but it is more aggressive than some of the other enemies. There are 8 stages in Exerion before the game loops, although only 4 backgrounds. The enemies on the 4th and 8th stages are especially bad. They take multiple hits to destroy, and fire shots that boomerang, dropping down and then swerving back up. If you survive 4 stages, then you go into a bonus stage that's identical to the ones from Galaxian and Galaga. You have unlimited rapid fire here, and you get 1 additional rapid fire shot for every enemy you shoot down in the stage. There is a secret bonus in Exerion as well. If you fulfill a special condition on each stage, a wave of 4 special ships will show up. I tried to find out what those conditions are, but nobody seems to have documented it. And that kind of sums up Exerion. It's a real, why would anyone care about this game? When I search for it in Japanese, by the 3rd page of results I'm already getting things that are completely unrelated. This is a game that's not bad enough to be memorable, and not good enough that anyone would ever really want to play it. I know starting this that this video is going to be short. Galaga is such a simple game, it's going to be hard to find a lot to say about it. But it is the apotheosis of single-screen arcade shooters. It's that genre in its perfect form. And the Famicom game is the best port that the game received in the 1980s. We'd have to enter the era of emulating arcade machines before we get a better version. The game's name is a portmanteau between galaxy and the Japanese word for moth. And as a sequel to Galaxian, you'll be shooting down a lot of space insects. At the start of each level, they swoop in, coming low past the player's ship, and letting you get some shots in as they take formation. Once all the alien insects have arrived, they commence bombing runs on the player's ship, swooping and circling as they reach the bottom of the screen. The greatest danger comes from the battleships at the top. They may descend with a pair of guardian red bugs, but if they come alone, then they stop short and release their tractor beam. That capture is the most important mechanic in Galaga. A high-risk, high-reward maneuver that can get you a lot of points or lose you everything. If you destroy the capturing battleship when it's at the top of the screen, your ship is released, but it remains red and hostile. You'll have to shoot it down. But if the battleship descends again for another attack run carrying your ship with it, destroying the battleship recovers your ship. It can't go back into stock, so instead it joins you, fighting side by side and doubling your firepower. Unfortunately, that also doubles the size of the target for the enemies. It costs you 1 life to get that extra firepower. Is it worth it? Well, if you're any good at the game, the answer is definitely yes. Doubling the firepower means you have an easy time getting all the enemies on the bonus stages, a quicker time clearing out the enemies as they come in. You'll blitz through the levels as long as you can keep your ships alive. The battleships are my one complaint about this version of Galaga. Their color is slightly off in their undamaged state. Yeah, that's not a huge complaint, but that's also the harshest thing I have to say about Galaga. They even got the audio right, which when you consider the Famicom's audio hardware is a real accomplishment. Sometimes one of the blue enemies will transform, releasing a swarm of insect ships to attack. If you get far enough, you'll see the battleships from Galaxian show up. Like with Pac-Man, Namco maintained the aspect ratio of the arcade machine by moving the score and lives to the right-hand side. In Pac-Man, they still had to compromise by shrinking the maze a little bit, but you don't feel any of those compromises at all with Galaga. An improvement over Galaxian is how you no longer are limited to a single shot on screen at once. Admittedly, now it's 2 shots on screen at once, or 4 at once if you have doubled your ship, but it's still a big improvement. Every few stages you'll encounter a bonus stage where ships will fly in from the sides in complex patterns and then fly off again. These bonus stage patterns start repeating after level 35, so that's generally what people consider the cutoff for beating the game. Although the series would continue, Galaxian and Galaga were the only 2 that were ported to the Famicom. When Galaga 88 came around, Namco wasn't very happy with Nintendo, and their efforts were going into PC Engine development. With Galaga, Namco has proven once again that they are the current masters of the Famicom. Galaga might be a simpler game than Mappy, but you don't need to be complex when everything is done exactly right. It has been 8 months since the release of the original Family Basic cartridge, and now Nintendo has a whole new version. To answer the obvious question of where version 2 has gone, it's actually the most common version of Family Basic. 1.0 was for an exceptionally rare Famicom variant that Sharp released. So the cartridge copies that were released for the regular Family computer were version 2. I went over a lot of the technical details and background in the original Family Basic video, so I'll keep it quick here. Basic is a programming language that throughout the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s was used as an introductory programming language. And as a result, a version of BASIC came with virtually every computer out there. Version 3 of Family Basic was released as a standalone cartridge, which meant you had to have the keyboard that you got with the previous version of Family Basic in order to use it. A key feature of Family Basic as a programming language is a lot of built-in routines for handling sprites, music, and gamepad input. What is new in Family Basic 3? Well, top of the list is that they expanded the amount of memory available for users. We've gone from 2K of memory available for your programs to 4K. That's an absurdly small amount of space, but it's still double what they had before. There's also a lot of improvements to the editor. A command to trace what line number you're at as you execute. One that easily lets you slip back and forth between the background graphics edit mode and the program edit mode. And even commands to find strings in your program. They also extended the functionality of the memory interface commands, which hobbyists took advantage of to write directly to the Famicom's memory and create much more complex games. Family Basic was the start of a lot of developers' careers in Japan, and there's a network of enthusiasts out there still making games for it to this day. Obviously, with the extended functions, Family Basic version 3 is the preferred cartridge. To get users started, there are 4 games included on the cartridge that are accessed through a basic command, game and then a number. And this number goes from 0 to 3. Game 0 isn't really interactive. It just draws a heart on the screen and then fills it in. Game 1 has the player controlling a penguin on a grid, and your goal is to collect all of the numbers in sequential order. I know that looks like 16 on that line, but it's really 1, then 6. This is a good point to bring up here, but all of these games respond very slowly to your inputs. The way that Family Basic pulls inputs is that it only checks when it runs that line of code. And the code executes very slowly, which means that everything feels stiff and unresponsive. It's important to remember that these games are programming exercises, not really something that you'd pop in and have a lot of fun with. Game 2 is a Lode Runner-esque platforming maze, but it has the same collect sequential numbers theme that Game 1 had. You can also collect the apples for extra points. And the things that look like barrels are springs that will shoot you up to the level above them if you stop on that space for a moment. The final game built into the cartridge, Game 3, is Star Killer, a Space Wars or Asteroids-esque shooting game. There are 2 ships, and the second one can be controlled by the computer or a second player. You rotate your ships by pressing left and right, and give it thrust by pressing up. Your goal, of course, is to shoot down more of the targets than your opponent. Or you could just shoot your opponent. But what if you wanted more sample programs than just those 4? Well, Hudson released cassettes with programs written in Family Basic. And you could load these off of any cassette recorder, not just the Famicom data recorder. As long as it had a headphone jack, you could run a wire between it and the Famicom keyboard. In fact, I'm loading these cassettes off an old Radio Shack Walkman clone. Lode Runner World was a double cassette release where one cassette was an expansion for the Famicom version of Lode Runner that had 100 new levels, and the other cassette were 10 games. 5 could be played on the original Family Basic cartridge, but 5 required version 3. Naturally, I'm going to briefly go over all 10. The process of loading a game from cassette is not as straightforward as you might expect. Family Basic saves graphics data and program data separately, so you have to go to the graphics editor and then choose to load. If you know the program you're looking for on the cassette, you can just type that name in and let it run through the cassette until it finds it. But if you leave it blank, then it'll just load the first thing it finds. Once it's loading, then you hit play on the cassette player, and then you wait. When the graphics are finally loaded, you exit back to program mode, and then load again. On all of the official Famicom Basic cassettes, the software is stored with all of the graphical data first, and then the basic program code second. The first game on the Lode Runner World cassette is Bingo 25, a game where unfortunately the magnetic media was a bit corrupted in my copy. But I think the gist of it is, you have a card with the numbers 1 through 25 on it randomly arranged, and so does your opponent, and you take turns guessing numbers, trying to avoid completing a bingo for the other player. The next game is Space Attacker, which is the most impressive game on the cassette. You're controlling a turret, and your goal is to line up shots with the ships that are coming down. But your shots are slow, and your viewpoint doesn't actually change, so you're trying to steer the flying saucers that are doing a random walk generally downward into your crosshair. You have energy that gets used up when you shoot, and you lose more of it if the ship reaches the bottom of the screen. I just wish that the energy pool wasn't so large, though you could always edit the program, I guess. The next game is Kata Ball, and I have a bit of graphics corruption again, but it's still pretty playable here. Your goal is to hit the bouncing balls until they fly off the top of the screen. Hit them twice and they evolve into their next form, which bounces higher, and if they bounce twice without you hitting them, then they devolve into a form that bounces lower. This wouldn't be so bad if the controls weren't so stiff. Next up is Barricade, which is just a classic snake game, although here there isn't another snake or any targets for you to gobble up, so it's kind of dry. The final game on Side A is Scramble. Sadly, not that one. You need to collide your ship with the fireballs that are coming down before they reach the bottom of the screen, and they'll destroy the platforms if they hit them. run out of platforms and it's game over. So closer to Missile Command than Scramble, really. Over to side B, where the games written specifically for Family Basic version 3 are. First up is Biotech, a bit of a confusing arcade game where you have to neutralize the monsters that are roaming around the tube, and then once they're in a safe state, pick them up and carry them over to the container. I found it kind of difficult to not accidentally change a monster from being safe to hostile again. It was just that the controls were kind of unresponsive. The next game doesn't have a graphics load. It's called The Puzzle, and it's just a sliding block puzzle. Only you're sliding numbers instead of a picture, so it's even less exciting. The third game also doesn't require a graphics load. It's called Slalom. Not that slalom. And here your goal is to just stay on the track, so you're not even really slaloming. You're on a timer for this one, and you lose points if you go off. Hot Pen Pen is a maze chase game where you're trying to collect the flag and avoid the monster. One thing you're going to notice as you're playing is that the monster speeds up a lot when you're not moving. That's because the routine to move your penguin is just so slow. The final game on here is Drill Tank, an arcadish game with some really obvious inspiration, where your goal is to defeat all of the fire-breathing turtles on each stage. I don't know why you have to drill through the soil in this game, it doesn't add anything. Those were the 10 games on the Lode Runner World cassette, but before I wrap up, I want to show off a current Family Basic program. I got this program from the channel Masando Vision, a YouTuber who recreates cassette vision games in Family Basic. I had to take about an hour to type it in myself since he's not finished with it yet, but this is a port of Kikori no Yosaku, which was Epoch's unlicensed port of SNK's first arcade game, which was also just called Yosaku. You're a woodcutter trying to chop down both trees on the stage while avoiding the enemies that are coming at you. The death routines haven't been implemented yet in the game, but it's still neat to see something like this built in Family Basic. I can't say that many people would want to go back to Family Basic version 3, or even try to play the games that were made in it. But Family Basic is an important part of the Famicom's legacy. It's the computer part of the family computer. Tinkering with Family Basic has made me appreciate that these days, if you want to make a game for the Famicom, there are some high-quality tools out there for you. I've seen Raid on Bungeling Bay turn up on multiple lists of the worst Famicom and NES games. I can kind of understand why. It started out as a Commodore 64 game, and computer games in the early 80s often demanded a bit more work from the player than the typical console game. You were expected to read the manual to know what to do. Bungeling Bay, and it is Bungeling, not Bungeling Bay, it doesn't tell you what your goal is or what to do. There's no gameplay flow that pushes you in a particular direction. You're supposed to know that before you start, and then find your own way to complete those goals. Which isn't to say Bungeling Bay is an overlooked masterpiece. Even the game's creator Will Wright says,
I don't know why everybody's here, because this is a talk about a really old, kind of mediocre game.
It's just Bungeling Bay is a game with ambition. It doesn't really succeed in those ambitions, but it tries. In the game, you're on a helicopter raid to destroy the weapons factories of the Bungeling Empire. They're a Caribbean island nation who are armed to the teeth and seem to consist entirely of industrial landscapes. The box and manual assures us that they're all robots, just so we know that we're not killing any human beings. You launch the game from a carrier, which is always steaming north through the island chain. And then you have to hunt through the islands for the weapons factories. There's 6 of them in all, and you'll need to bomb them to complete your mission. It actually kind of reminds me of the Strike games that would come out 10 years later. Bungeling Bay's claim to fame is that the world is not static. The Empire does not sit there and wait for you to show up. Instead, boats are constantly bringing resources to land, Tanks are taking those resources to the factories, and the factories are turning out more weapons. Theoretically, if you disrupt those supply chains, then you can make your life a lot easier. In practice, I didn't really see a whole lot of difference. It doesn't feel like there's a connection between attacking the ships and preventing additional turrets or jets from showing up. Maybe if I was willing to dedicate a lot more time to playing this one, I'd be able to tell the difference. But it's really hard to work up a lot of enthusiasm for Bungeling Bay. Bungeling Bay is an absolutely huge area, approximately 10 screens by 10 screens, and the player can freely wander around it. This is the first Famicom game we've seen with multi-directional scrolling. It's a bit choppy, but this was something revolutionary in 1985. In another first for the Famicom, this is the first time where you don't die in one hit. The helicopter can take quite a pounding. If you get over 60% damage, then you start having difficulty with control. And if you get over 100 damage, then you start to crash, but you don't crash immediately. If you can make it back to your aircraft carrier, then you'll get healed all the way back. That aircraft carrier is also one of your biggest vulnerabilities. Over time, the Bungeling Empire will locate it and start bombing runs on it. If they manage to sink the aircraft carrier, then the next time that you die, you don't revive. Starting on the second stage, they also build a battleship to hunt for it. If the battleship enters the same screen as the aircraft carrier, then it torpedoes the aircraft carrier and it's sunk. You get a warning when the battleship is being built and can bomb it in dock, and another warning once the battleship has been launched. Taking out the factories is what occupies most of the game. They always spawn in the exact same spots, but I always find the map to be kind of confusing, and so I wind up having to hunt around for them a lot. The first step once you locate a factory is taking out the local defenses. The radar dish summons additional aircraft to attack you, the tanks and the turrets can fire on you, and you'll need to get those cleared out before you move on. As the difficulty increases, the turrets can eventually start shooting heat-seeking missiles. They'll track you forever and move exactly as fast as the helicopter in perfect shape does, so you'll have to shoot them down. Bombing is harder than it seems. You can't really drop bombs as you're moving at speed, so you have to slow down and just about hover over the factory to drop those. On top of that, it can take a lot of bombs to destroy a factory. As you destroy factories, their defenses improve, and so there will be more things around you to attack, but also the factory becomes more fortified and it takes more bombs to destroy them. You can only carry 9 bombs, and typically before you've hit the third factory, it will take more than 9 bombs to destroy it. So what you'll wind up having to do is bomb the factory with a full load, go off to reload the bombs, come back, bomb the factory again till it's destroyed, go back and reload. Technically, you don't have to go back to the aircraft carrier to reload. You can land on these Broderbund symbols near this airstrip. They'll refill your bombs, but won't repair your aircraft fully. On top of that, if an enemy contacts you while you're at the airstrip, it'll destroy you instantly. It takes extra time to take off and land there as well, so I find it better to just fly back to the aircraft carrier. It's usually a shorter trip, and you get fully repaired for it. As the Bungeling Empire becomes more aggressive, they'll start attacking the aircraft carrier, and you'll have to shoot down the bombers that are attacking it before you can land. When you see that alert, it means that they're attacking, so you should head back to the aircraft carrier immediately. Sometimes you'll get the word special when you destroy a factory, and the aircraft carrier will change colors. All that means is that you get a point bonus when you land on the aircraft carrier. The difference between Game A and Game B is that Game B starts on the third round. The third round is roughly as difficult as the original computer game is, so if you want a challenge, that's the mode to go for. The first round in Game A doesn't have the battleship, it doesn't have heat-seeking missiles, so it's much easier to complete. There is a two-player option, and it's actually an asymmetrical multiplayer. One player controls the helicopter, the other player controls the bungling forces. They can control the turrets, fire their shots at missiles at the player. On the Famicom version, player 2 can shout into the microphone to call in airstrikes. Apparently, that feature was added just 2 days before the game was shipped to manufacturing. And it makes Bungeling Bay the first game to use the microphone on the Famicom. Bungeling Bay was a pretty big hit for Hudson. It sold over 800,000 copies on the Famicom. Only around 20,000 copies of it were sold on the original Commodore 64 platform, so that was quite a boost. And take a good look at the Bungeling Bay box. There's Will Wright's name right on the cover. As far as I'm able to tell, that's the only time this happens on the Famicom. Bungeling Bay is a game that has a lot going on in it, and none of it is presented well to the player. It's hard to identify the factories and locate them. It's hard to tell the connection between the resource collection and development. It's hard to tell when aircraft are going to spontaneously shoot in from the side of the screen and knock you down to the sky instantaneously. It's historically interesting as the first work from a major game developer, but it's also really hard to sit down and play these days. It's better than its reputation, but that's because its reputation is so abysmal. I thought about making the whole video just that sound, but I should probably do a little bit more than that. The nicest thing about Formation Z is that parallax scrolling in the background. That's a pretty good effect on the Famicom in 1985. And between this and Exerion, Galaga seems to have the market cornered on impressive scrolling. If only they'd make good games to go with those graphical flourishes. Originally an arcade game, Formation Z merges run and gun and shoot 'em up. You start out as the giant robot running along the ground, but if you hold down the jump button, you transform into a jet and fly through the air for a while. Your time as a jet is limited by the amount of fuel that you have. It drops at the rate of about a point every half second, and you can pick up the fuel canisters along the ground to get 10 back. There's one of the stranger things about Formation Z, and one of the many gameplay problems with it. Enemy patterns and pickups aren't fixed. What matters for the ground stages is the distance that you've covered. The robot is much slower than the jet, but the jet can run out of fuel. And if you run out of fuel, you just crash and die. The canisters only appear along the ground and they are very close to it, so it's tricky to get a feel for how close you have to go to get those. And they're also random. So you could fly for a while without seeing one of those canisters. And that becomes a serious problem at the end of the ground stages. After you've fought your way through, you take to the skies to fly over the water. And you have to have 84 fuel to make it from the end of the previous ground stage to the beginning of the next. There are no fuel pickups over the water, so if you didn't have the gas, then you're out. So it's better to stay in robot form, right? It's true that you're more likely to survive if you stay in robot mode, but it turns the game into a real slog. The robot can shoot ahead or up and down at about a 30-degree angle. And there's lots of enemies on the ground who the robot's shots just go right over. The robot never stops moving forward, so you have to time your shot perfectly to hit them. The arcade is much more forgiving about this, with larger enemies, more generous hitboxes. and the robot there can actually back away from things. While on the Famicom, your backward speed is the exact speed that the objects are moving toward you. I developed a strategy of flying for a few seconds, then transforming back to the robot until I was refueled, then flying back and forth to repeat that. One other feature of Formation Z is that you can charge your shot. If you hold down the fire button, your shot speed decreases, but you'll shoot out bursts that go through normal enemies and can destroy certain other enemies that are armored. Watch out when you do that to tanks though. Sometimes part of the tank sprite remains behind and you'll run into that. Another annoying enemy behavior are those green balls on the ground. Sometimes when you approach them, they bounce up into the air. Sometimes they just stay sitting on the ground. How you dodge them depends on which behavior they have, but you can't know which behavior they have until they do it. I started just transforming into jet mode for a few seconds to fly over them. You can also time a downward shot perfectly, but it's really tight timing. There's 6 stages in Formation Z, and they alternate between a ground mode and an aerial mode. At the end of the 4th and 6th stages, there are bosses. They only take 1 charged shot to their vulnerable point to defeat. The fuel counter doesn't run down while you're fighting the bosses either. Formation Z has a bit of the same problem that Exerion did, where it feels a bit sluggish and unresponsive. In Exerion, at least that seemed to be intentional. Here it just feels sloppy. The only other thing of interest with Formation Z that I can think of is that it's the first Famicom game developed by Hecht. Hecht made the original arcade game, and the sources I've found indicated that they helped with the Famicom port as well. Hecht will go on to be a second-tier publisher for the system. The arcade Formation Z had really tiny enemies, and it isn't much fun to play. The Famicom version took that and made everything smaller, and made it much worse to play. It's not the worst thing we've seen on the Famicom so far, but it's down there. It's another sports game, so you know this is going to be a short video. I searched around trying to find anything special or interesting about soccer, but even my Japanese sources don't care too much about the game. I did find a fan site for it in Japanese. I've read that the sport wasn't very popular in Japan in 1985, but the sales on soccer doesn't bear that out. Nintendo sold over 1.5 million copies of it. So I'm not sure why Nintendo's soccer faded away while things like baseball stuck around in popular consciousness. If I had to guess, though, I'd say it's because this isn't a very good soccer game. Like in Nintendo's other early sports offerings, there's no difference between the teams in soccer. You're simply picking a jersey color and what letters appear at the top of the scoreboard. The 5 difficulty levels range from totally brain dead to can run circles around you. The timing is not accurate. 15-minute halves are actually about 3 minutes long in the game. There's only 6 players a side in this soccer game, and the pitch is similarly scaled down. This feels like a tiny soccer match rather than a full-fledged game. Superficially, the controls seem easy enough. The D-pad moves you around, B passes, and A shoots. But there's a lot of secondary things that are happening too. As you move up and down, you're changing where you're aiming on the goal. Picking out who you're passing to is a real pain, and it's actually pretty hard to maintain control of the ball. Meanwhile, it seems to be pretty easy to intercept balls that are being passed. If you've got some people moving in to block you, you're probably not going to be able to pass the ball to get it away from them. It's difficult to change what direction you're running because you don't automatically maintain control of the ball. If the goalie's on screen, you're controlling them simultaneously with your own player. The way players move together and the ball doesn't necessarily stay under your control, it feels like you're playing foosball rather than soccer. I'm not convinced that the AI is particularly strong either. Beating it on level 1 was effortless, even as somebody who hadn't played this game in well over a decade. Yet level 5 pushed me around, but I wasn't really seeing anything interesting in its behavior. The simplistic behavior was making me think that if I was willing to stick with the game for an hour or so, I'd be able to beat level 5 too. But that would require me wanting to keep playing soccer. So here's the thing. We're going to get a lot better soccer games on the Famicom. In the early 90s, there's a bit of a soccer boom in Japan, and there's some very late Famicom soccer games that actually look pretty solid. If you want a more strategic soccer game, there's the Captain Tsubasa games. If you want a more action-y game, there's the 2 Kunio games. There's no reason to go back and play Nintendo Soccer. I'm going to confess up front that I'm not the biggest Space Invaders fan. I can play the game for about 3 minutes every 6 months or so, and then I'm good for a while. Space Invaders might be the game that made the Japanese video game industry and a cultural phenomenon in Japan on the scale of nothing we've seen for any game before or since. But there's not a lot to it. After one game, I feel like I've done everything in the game that I want to do. By the time Space Invaders reached the Famicom, it was already a retro game. It was 7 years old and many generations behind on technology. There was an excellent Atari VCS port that came out in 1980. That version expanded the game, added a bunch of different modes, and was a pretty snappy play. It was even released in Japan for the Atari 2800 in 1983. The Famicom version, which Taito ported themselves as their very first release for the system, well, the best thing I can say about it is that they replicate the Attract mode. Past that, this is not a good port. To quickly break down one of the most familiar games that we're going to see on the Famicom, the aliens arrive in a big grid pattern, and they march back and forth across the screen. When they reach the edge of the screen, they drop down a row, and repeat until they reach the bottom. Your base at the bottom of the screen shoots up at them, one bullet at a time, and you have to eliminate all of the Space Invaders before they reach you. Occasionally, a UFO will appear and beep across the screen. It has a variable point value that cycles each time you hit fire. As you eliminate the invaders, they speed up their movement, until the final one zips across the screen. Clear all the invaders, and the new group shows up one line lower. The first thing you'll notice in Space Invaders is how everything's been squished down to one side. Taito tried to replicate what Namco did with their games and move the scoring and lives to one side to maintain the screen aspect ratio. The problem is that Namco didn't stop there. They made a few more compromises to the layout in order to make everything fit cleanly. Taito decided they wanted to keep the 11 columns of Space Invaders despite the reduced number of pixels to put them into. They redrew the aliens with fewer pixels, but they didn't have that many pixels to give up in the first place, and so they've kind of lost their iconic shape. These problems carry over to the shields, which don't display the damage performed to them very well. It's still the same number of shots to get through the shield, it just doesn't look like it. I find that the compression performed on the graphics makes the game a lot harder to play, especially as the invaders close in. There is a bit of a problem with this, because this is not a port of Space Invaders. It's a port of Space Invaders and Space Invaders Part 2. The catch is, You have to beat level 8 of Space Invaders before Space Invaders Part 2 starts. Beating 8 levels of Space Invaders is more of an endurance test than anything else. I tried for a while, and the furthest I could make it was the 6th wave. If I kept at it for a long time, I might start being able to get there consistently, but the game exhausts me. I don't know why Part 2 wasn't an option from the main menu. If you can beat 8 levels of Space Invaders, getting returned to level 1 of Space Invaders isn't really a reward. That's something that really sums up the Famicom Space Invaders. It's a real, why would you do it this way game. Taito has kept Space Invaders available on virtually every platform since 1990. So you don't have to look too hard for a better, more arcade-accurate port. And if you do want something that builds on the base game, they've been doing that recently as well. But the Famicom port, just pass on that one. That's what it says on the box for Championship Lode Runner, and they mean it. There are 2 games I'd put at the very top of the most difficult Famicom games. One of them requires that you have psychic powers to beat it. That's not a joke. It literally requires that you have psychic powers to beat it. The other is Championship Lode Runner. You know how in Mario Maker, some people make those levels that require pixel-perfect movement through the whole thing? And they make them as crazy challenges that only a handful of people will ever really enjoy? That's Championship Lode Runner. Players from around the world sent Lode Runner creator Doug Jones their own levels. He selected 40 that he found to be the hardest stages out there. There's another 10 stages that were selected by the editorial board of a game magazine. 25 of these levels came from Japanese players. The thing is, these levels go beyond just being challenging. They go into straight-out sadism. A very common element in these levels is that they require that the player completely manipulate the robots. You have to use them as bridges, sometimes while they're in midair. You have to kill them at the right point so that they respawn correctly. You have to manipulate their movement so that they'll fall into the correct holes to make new bridges. The manual has a lengthy section on how to manipulate the robot movements and what you can do with them. It also reassures players that all the stages are beatable, and lets them know that Hudson will not provide hints. Even when you know what you're doing in Championship Lode Runner, doing it right requires amazing skill. Hudson did make a couple of improvements to the Famicom Lode Runner engine for Championship Lode Runner. The screen now scrolls in multiple directions, so it can go tall as well as wide. The holes take a little bit longer to fill in, which was necessary to complete some of the challenges. If you pause the game, you can scroll around the map so that you can view the whole screen. Most significantly of all, if you try to skip ahead to level 11, it requires that you enter a password. All of the levels past level 11 require a password, and if players manage to collect all the passwords, they could mail those passwords into Hudson to receive a card that certified them as champion Lode Runners. I found that they only issued about 50,000 of these cards. Even in the days when it was more common for people to dedicate themselves to beating a single game, Championship Lode Runner made a lot of people give up. How mean are these levels? Well, the official guidebook to Championship Lode Runner says about level 31, "This is not a puzzle." That stage requires that you first manipulate the robots to fill in the hole at the bottom, then fall your way through the invisible maze, sometimes requiring a drill in just the right spot. until you fall out at the bottom onto the gold bar. There's plenty of dead ends in the maze for you too, so watch out. As for my own record with Championship Lode Runner, I have beaten 2 stages in the past. I couldn't do it again while I was recording the video, but I have beaten them. So here's the thing about Championship Lode Runner. I know that some of the nearly 24 people who will watch this video will see it and go, I like challenging games. I should play that. That is exactly what happened to me. You enter with bravado, and then quickly find out that it's a nightmare of cruelty. And the thing is, Championship Lode Runner has a pretty small bag of tricks. Do you like manipulating robots so that they fill in gaps that you can cross? What about long paths that you have to keep running back and forth on so that you can open them up a little bit more each time before they seal back up again? If Championship Lode Runner was a series of thoughtful levels that had a variety of challenges, I'd say go for it. But this is more levels from people who figured out a couple of very difficult to perform tricks and then just wanted you to do those tricks over and over again. Lode Runner is good. These levels are not. We've got a new publisher, and it's one of the big ones. Konami released 2 games on April 22nd. I like both of them, but I'm going to talk about the one that's more historically interesting first. The most challenging thing about this game is how to pronounce it. The katakana tells me it's supposed to be Yie Ar Kung Fu, but the Chinese words it comes from are more like Yie Ar Kung Fu, so I'm going to go with that. Yie Ar Kung Fu is right out. One of the most interesting things about Yie Ar is that it was based on an arcade game. That arcade game was about 3 months old when this Famicom version was released. The Famicom version is almost identical to the MSX version, which was released simultaneously as the arcade game. In a weird way, the Famicom version is an advertisement for the arcade game. The Famicom version features 5 opponents, while the arcade game has 12. You can play and practice the Famicom game at home, and then go to the arcade for a bigger challenge. Getting into the game itself, Yie Ar Kung Fu is a very early example of the fighting genre. And I think it's the first one that really resonates with what the genre would become. There's a variety of opponents. You've got a life bar. And hey, that's the first life bar we've seen on the Famicom. You've got a variety of moves that each have different advantages. There's an arena that you walk around in while you fight. And check out the last enemy. He does a Psycho Crusher. There's really only 6 moves you can do in Yie Ar Kung Fu. The key is they all have slightly different reach. So if an enemy is closing in on you, you might want to do a low sweeping kick. If you're in close, you'll need to do a short punch. And if you need to close the gap between you, you always have the flying kick. The flying kick has an extra trick to it. If you jump away from your opponent and into the wall, you'll bounce off it with equal force. That can be pretty useful when you want to control the distance where you're kicking. All the moves do the exact same amount of damage. Both you and your opponent can take 8 hits before you fall. Let's take a good look at our opponents. Hong is the bow staff master. Watch out for his reach. Tao is a fire breather, and I know what you're saying, a martial artist who can shoot fireballs? It's a bit unusual. Chen wields the weighted chain, and I find him to be the toughest of the opponents. The chain can hit you both coming and going. It's not uncommon to get hit twice when he throws it out. After Chen is a bonus stage in which you have to strike down objects that are flying at you. I find it kind of tricky to do. even when I don't accidentally jump into one of them. Next up we have Long, the sole female opponent. She shoots shurikens down by the seashore. Okay, it's the same temple, I just wanted to say that. Finally, there's Mu, who can hurl his body across the screen. Once you defeat him, you finally get to kick that gong that's been so tempting in the background the whole time, and you start over again from the beginning. If you're wondering why these martial artists are going at it, well, the manual doesn't have a story. A few more tips here. You can knock any projectile out of the air by attacking it. Generally, this affects Long and Tao more than any of the others. The weighted chain can also be attacked, but it's much faster than the other projectiles, and it keeps going after you attack it. The real key to playing Yie Ar Kung Fu is in the attack distances. Generally, you're going to want to get in close to these opponents because that's where they're the least effective. So you'll have to use close-up attacks when you're right on them, the punches and the low kicks. If the opponent is moving around a lot, the sweep is generally the best move because they'll run into it. And a well-timed jump kick to the head is usually the best way to get in close to the opponent. It can be tricky to get a feel for how to fight in Yie Ar Kung Fu because there will be a lot of punches and kicks that seem to miss. Only the very point of impact is what matters, so the end of your fist or your foot. The enemy's hitboxes also don't exactly match the sprite, so you'll have to take some time and get a real feel for exactly how much reach each attack has. As is common at this time, the second difficulty just lets the player start at the second round of fighting. Personally, I find the third round of fighting to be where the game gets hard, but you'll probably still want to practice on level 1 just to get a feel for those attacks. The biggest problem with Yie Ar Kung Fu? No two-player mode. This game is crying out for the opportunity to pit players against each other. Despite that shortcoming, and despite not having a whole lot of opponents, Yie Ar Kung Fu is still a pretty cool game. It is the best fighting game we're going to see on the Famicom until... Let me just look down this list. Still looking. Still looking. Still looking. Oh, 1993. There's very few fighting games on the Famicom, so it's nice that this is such a good one. Kekkyoku Nankyoku Daiboken is the other game that Konami burst onto the Famicom with. This one started out on the other big platform that Konami supported, the MSX. It got ported around a bit too before it made its way to the Famicom. So not quite as impressive as bringing their current big arcade game to the system. Kekkyoku Nankyoku Daiboken, and that's the last time I'm going to say that because the cartridge has an English title on it, and the title screen only has the English title Antarctic Adventure on it. It's a cute game. Not an especially deep one, but it's cute. In the game, Penta the Penguin is racing around Antarctica. You're not competing against anyone, you're just racing the clock. Your waypoints are various scientific stations around the continent. Though oddly enough, no station from a communist country. You set up from the Japanese station and then work your way around. The locations of the stations actually are reflective of real-world Antarctic research stations in the 1980s. So the distances between them for each leg of the race are kind of close to the real-world distances for those paths. Maybe that's why I've seen some Japanese sources call this an educational game. There's 3 obstacles that you'll encounter in your run. Crevasses are the biggest risk. You'll fall into these and have to hit the jump button to get out again. They're often placed so that you'll have to jump over several in a row like hurdles. The smaller pits won't pull you down, but they will make you stumble. Stumbling puts your speed down to 0 when you lose control for a few seconds. Sometimes a fish will burst out of one of those holes. You can collect it for extra points. And watch out while jumping over the holes, because that's where you can encounter the third obstacle, a walrus that pops out of them. When you collide with her, you get pushed to the side. Along the way, you'll spot green and blue flags. Those can be collected for extra points. In case you couldn't tell, this is really a score attack game rather than a race game. The flashing flags are the most important ones to collect. Getting one of those will give you a propeller beanie. Jump again while you're in the air to fly ahead. It does come with a few caveats though. You can only do this once per pickup. And worst of all, if you're wearing the beanie and run into any obstacle, you lose it. So there's definitely a use it or lose it situation here. You set Penta's speed by pressing up and down on the control pad. The thing is, there's barely enough time on a lot of legs to complete the course at full speed. We're talking maybe 15 spare seconds out of over a minute and a half. So lowering your speed to deal with obstacles or sharp turns is generally the last thing you want to do. This isn't a racing game where you need to brake to go around corners easily. You can take every turn in Antarctic Adventure at full speed without a problem. So go flat out and only reduce the speed when jumping over an obstacle will land you in another obstacle. Another tip: the edges of the crevasses won't drop you into them, they'll just make you stumble. Depending on the situation you're in, you might want to aim for those instead. If you think you've heard the music in Antarctic Adventure before but don't quite recognize it, it's The Skater's Waltz by Emile Voltefeu. There's not a lot more I can say about Antarctic Adventure. I've read that it wasn't particularly popular on release since it felt a bit old-fashioned to players in 1985. Penta becomes one of Konami's mascots and shows up in a handful of other games on the Famicom. I kind of like Antarctic Adventure, but it is way too simple. I had fun playing it while I was recording this video, but by the time I was done, I'm done with Antarctic Adventure for the time being. Still, I know in a few months I'll come across it again and go, oh, I like that, I should play it again. Jalico and Tosei are back at it again. But this time, they brought something actually, okay, not good, but playable. Let's go with playable. Ninja-kun Majonoboken, or Ninja Kid, the Demon Castle Adventure, has a bit of a confusing history. The original arcade game is by an obscure company called UPL. That arcade game has been released in some regions as Ninja Kid. However, Bandai released a different game as Ninja Kid in the US. Ninja-kun is a relatively simple action game. There's a vertically scrolling stage with 8 enemies on it, and you have to eliminate all 8 to move on to the next board. There's 2 different board layouts. The mountain reoccurs twice. And then the final one is a castle. But here's the thing. Ninja-kun is a hard game. A while back, I challenged myself to try to complete all 18 stages of it. After a full day of trying, I managed to get to the 12th board. A single hit kills Ninja-kun, and the game is not generous with its extra lives. Death comes at you fast in Ninja-kun. You attack with throwing stars, but the range is super limited. Your attacks can also intercept enemy attacks. That requires that they be pretty closely aligned, though. One thing that can help you in Ninja-kun is that coming in direct contact with enemies doesn't kill you. It's only their attacks. If they run into you, then you get stunned, but you can jump into them and stun them for a moment. That's an absolutely vital technique to be able to make any progress. Another quirky thing in the game are the stage bosses. Every stage after the first one has one enemy that's a bit more difficult. On levels 2 and 3, there's a Daruma, for example, and it can shoot curved blades at an angle. I actually found them to be the most dangerous enemies in the game I encountered. The thing is, from stages 4 to 6, the Daruma become the regular enemy, and the boss enemy is now this bomb-throwing fox. And then for stages 7 through 9, the bomb-throwing fox is the regular enemy. Later stages add a fireball that slowly chases you around the level. It can't be hurt and just has to be avoided. I need to talk about the movement because it's a bit different from what people are used to. The original arcade game was played with a two-way directional joystick, a jump button, and a fire button. The Famicom version replicates its control scheme, so if you aren't holding a direction and you press jump, you go down through the floor. You have to be holding left or right and pressing jump to get up. It's a little bit funky, but I got used to it pretty quickly. At the 100-second mark, an orb drops from the top of the stage. You need to catch that before it goes off the bottom. It helps to be pretty high up at that 100-second mark so that you can see it coming down with plenty of time to react. The orb is worth a lot of points, but the more important thing is if you collect 3 of them, then you go to a bonus stage. On the bonus stage, you collect orbs, and if you collect all of them, you get a pretty enormous bonus. When killed, enemies drop these scrolls that you pick up that are worth bonus points at the end of the level. There can only be one scroll out at a time though, so if you kill another enemy, the first scroll that was out disappears. The thing that bothers me the most in Ninja-kun is the visual design. Not the characters, I actually think they come out pretty cute for some early Famicom game stuff. I'm talking about things like the interstitials between levels, which do this palette cycling that's really headache-inducing. And the castle level has one floor that it's really hard to tell that it's supposed to be a floor that you can jump to. Ninja-kun is a game with an interesting legacy. For whatever reason, UPL and Jalico parted ways. But Jalico didn't want to give up the cute ninja game. So they created their own character to fill that role who looks almost identical to Ninja-kun. Ninja Jajamaru was even initially described as Ninja-kun's younger brother. Jajamaru is going to have an absolutely enormous series of games on the Famicom, and we'll get to them in time. Pretty soon, in fact. But Ninja-kun himself got his own sequel. And that sequel got one of the weirder Famicom ports out there. As for this game, I find it to be pretty playable. It's far from a masterpiece, and I really wish there were more levels to it. But the way that it shifts up the enemies continuously is kind of fun. It's very much an arcade game from that transitional period where no one was quite sure where they were going yet, but they were moving there fast. I just wish they had made it a little bit easier on the home player. Chack'n Pop is one of the games that inspired this project. I bought Chack'n Pop, put the game in, and then couldn't figure out what I was doing. The game is not especially intuitive. I searched around for some information on it, and all I could find in English were sites that told me that it was the precursor to Bubble Bobble. Okay, that's interesting and historically significant, but how do I play? What's it like? How deep are those connections to Bubble Bobble? Chack'n Pop is treated just as a game that exists. a title to fill in a spot on a list, and the answer to a trivia question. So let's give Chack'n Pop its due here. As you might guess, given it's a title game, Chack'n Pop originated in the arcade. I've seen a Japanese source call it a popular arcade game, though it seems like it hasn't really stuck around in popular memory. The yellow, kind of birdish thing is Chack'n. Chack'n's goal on each stage, which this game calls mazes, is to free the hearts that are trapped in cages. Once the hearts are free, they break down the brick walls that block the exit. Stuck to the ceiling at various points are eggs. Over time, these will hatch into monsters called, well, monster. I guess they weren't very creative with the names. They'll pursue Chack'n if Chack'n gets a bit too close. Chack'n has a tool to protect herself. She can drop a red bomb out to one side. The A button drops it to the right, and the B button drops it to the left. There's a bit of momentum in it too, so it'll roll a distance before it stops. The bomb explodes into that smoke cloud. The smoke flows a bit around corners, but it doesn't go too far. It gets rid of the monsters and eggs that are trapped in it, but if Chack'n is trapped in it, it kills her as well. The mazes aren't particularly intuitive to navigate. Chack'n has the ability to stretch up to the ceiling. The height she can stretch to depends on how many feet she has on the ground. She cannot change levels while she's on the ceiling though, so if the ceiling changes, then she just falls right off. She can also stretch to get up some small steps. What she cannot do though is jump. She also won't stop moving when she starts moving left or right. You have to use an obstacle to bring Chack'n to a halt. It can be tricky to find a path with these movements, and you'll often find yourself having to go the long way around. And that brings me to the levels. Now you might think that as a bit of a puzzle-ish platformer, that Chack'n Pop would have a huge number of levels. The arcade has 14, and that was reduced to 9 on the Famicom. There's no way to continue when you game over or skip to a certain level, so you have to play the game the whole way through. Here's a few tricks that will help you get through the levels. In Maze 3, you can't approach the cage. Instead, you need to stretch your legs up and release a bomb exactly at the height of your movement. It won't destroy the entire cage, you'll have to do it once for each side. The timing is super tight on that. On some levels, you'll find this moving platform. The monsters can get squeezed in between the platform and a wall to kill them. Also, you can get squeezed between the wall and the moving platform. It's a bit hard to move around on that platform too. The real secret to progress lies in the bonus at the end of each stage. If you kill all of the enemies when they're in monster form, or kill all of the enemies while they're in egg form, then you get some additional point bonus. However, if you manage to clear the stage without destroying any enemies, you get an enormous point bonus, plus an extra life. It's pretty easy to do this on the first stage, and it's definitely doable on the second. So that's a good way to rack up some extra lives to try to complete the game with. There's one element of the stage I haven't mentioned yet. Along the top row there's a monster pushing that brick. That's basically the timer for the stage. If he reaches the end, then you lose a life. In play, I was never pressured by the timer. I had to wait around to get this picture. So Chack'n Pop to Bubble Bobble. The biggest thing is that they share some of the sprites. Both Chack'n and the Monster appear in Bubble Bobble games. The visual design is a bit similar too, though obviously you can't pass through the platforms in Chack'n Pop. Beyond that though, totally different game. We won't even be seeing Bubble Bobble 1 in Famidaily since it's a Famicom Disk System game. I can't say Chack'n Pop is a really great game. It's playable. It's okay. But the Tosei port isn't doing it any favors. It feels a bit awkward. Never really quite comes together. And to quote the old joke, such terrible portions. 9 stages just isn't enough for this kind of game. This is a very middle-of-the-road game that I just don't see anyone really getting into. Oh boy, a Namco game! I wish every publisher was putting the same care and effort into their Famicom games as Namco was. I'm looking at you, Jalico. Namco's run of quality isn't going to last, of course. I mean, they did publish 84 games on the system, so... Will this be the game that ends their streak? Of course not, it's Dig Dug. Although I think this port isn't as strong as their earlier ones, it's still pretty good. The main character of Dig Dug is, Dig Dug. Namco will give him a different name 20 years from now. So Dig Dug is a guy with a drill who's heading underground to eliminate some monsters. Wherever he walks, he digs tunnels through the soil, and as he moves, a jaunty tune plays. The monsters he's hunting are the balloonish Puka and the dragon-like Fygar. They start out the levels trapped in these pockets, but eventually they'll choose to just walk through the wall to go after Dig Dug. The monsters prefer to use open tunnels, though. Dig Dug's primary weapon for dealing with them is an air pump. It shoots out a short distance, and you have to hit the button repeatedly to inflate the monster and make it explode. Alternatively, Dig Dug can undermine one of these rocks. Once dislodged, the rock will fall, and any monsters underneath it can get squished. The monsters can spot the rock coming, though, and get out of the way. And the rock can squish Dig Dug as well. When there's one monster left, they take off running. They head towards the top of the screen to exit out of the upper left. As you might expect in a Namco game, the scoring system winds up being a bit complicated. Rather than a constant number of points for eliminating a monster, you get different points based on what strata of dirt they're in. And for Fygars, you get double points on them for inflating them from the more risky horizontal directions where they could breathe fire at you. That's not bad, but the real points are in the rocks. Getting a whole bunch of monsters squished at once is worth a lot of points. But the longer the monster train you've got on you, the more risk you're in. One of the convenient tricks for managing the monster crowd is turning around, pumping up a monster a couple of times, and then running away. They'll slowly deflate and then start chasing you again, but it'll give you a little bit of space, and if you're trying to herd them all into a rock, that's what you're going to need to do. Occasionally vegetables will appear in the middle of the field. Those are just some extra points for you to collect. A cute trick you can do is to not drill the whole way into those pockets that the monsters are in. Your pump will extend a little ways into the soil, and so you can pump them up in a spot where they won't come after you. You can catch monsters that are phasing through the dirt this same way. Watch out on the thin walls, though. Fygar's flames go through it just as much as your drill does. I have two key problems with this port of Dig Dug. First, the color palette on the Famicom really washes out the game. The arcade version's really bright and colorful, and the Famicom version just seems a bit dingy. Namco has been making compromises with their game's color palettes, but it feels like in Dig Dug they might have compromised in the wrong direction. I actually don't mind how the screen is scaled in Famicom Dig Dug. We're losing a lot of vertical space here, but I think that the proportions used work fine for the home system. Second, the controls are a bit rough. Dig Dug has never had the tightest control scheme, but it feels worse on the Famicom somehow. I'm always getting stuck when I try to make a sharp turn while I'm running from enemies. It's not disastrously bad, it just feels like it could be better. Dig Dug does get a sequel on the Famicom, and it actually won't be that long until we see it. So Dig Dug's one of my favorite arcade games. This Famicom port, it's good. It's got its flaws, and I don't think it's as much of a substitution for the arcade game as some of Namco's other ports have been. It's pretty close to the original, though, and it captures a lot of what made Dig Dug fun. We've got our fifth third-party Famicom publisher, and it's DB Soft? Most people who got on board with the Famicom early went on to be major game companies. DB Soft, well, they released 6 Famicom games early in the system's lifespan, and then they found their real market in making, violent porn games that caused a national outrage. I'm never talking about those games, so let's talk about Flappy instead. Flappy shared the top spot with Excitebike for the most expensive Famicom game. And Flappy earned that price. It is the largest Famicom cartridge to date, with a full 512 kilobits, or 64 kilobytes, of ROM. Almost every other Famicom game so far has been 24 kilobytes. So it's a big game, and the cart and the box tell you proudly how large it is, with 240 levels. It's actually 200 levels long, with 40 bonus stages. But considering that even Hudson's giant games have had 50 stages, this one's a big one. Flappy started out on the PC-88 platform. You can kind of tell since it has the slow, methodical puzzle game elements that were popular on computer platforms at the time. As for how it plays, Flappy is like if the box-pushing game Sokoban and the boulder-rolling game Boulder Dash had an affair and put the child up for adoption. The goal on every stage is to get the blue boulder onto the blue platform. You can push, but not pull the boulders. Also, while Flappy and the monsters trying to stop her can move freely around the level, everything else is affected by gravity. So pushing a boulder off an edge causes it to fall. A useful thing to know is that boulders can be pushed in half-step increments. Getting things to stack in those half steps is crucial to most levels. The other thing to know about boulders is that you can destroy them. If you push them into a wall or against a monster, they will get crushed. The blue boulder can never be crushed, though. You'll often find yourself using a boulder as a bridge and then having to crush it afterwards to open up the path again. The monsters in Flappy are a bit unusual. They have behavior patterns, but they also have a bit of random walk to them. The green unicorns can only move horizontally, so they tend to wander back and forth in an area. The crabby Ebelors attempt to go straight to Flappy, but that random walk sometimes gets in the way and they'll kind of drift off, but sometimes that also lets them get out of an area that they're trapped in and come after you. To deal with them, Flappy can pick up some magic mushrooms. The mushrooms can be thrown in any direction, but after they hit a surface, they fall down. Enemies struck by a mushroom fall asleep. A difference between the computer version and the Famicom version is that in the Famicom version, the enemies can be pushed. That's useful since you can push them under where a boulder will fall and squish them. Of course, it's possible to squish yourself too if you're not careful. Each stage has a timer, but you don't need to think about it too much. You could always just pause the game and then you have all the time in the world to think of a solution. If you ever render a puzzle unsolvable, then you'll need to hold down Start and Select at the same time. You'll lose a life, but you can try again. That brings me to the most frustrating thing about Flappy, the password system. You have 5 lives when you start the game, and after you complete 5 stages, a bonus stage occurs. On the bonus stage, you have to chase down enemies and hit the A button to eliminate them. And once you complete that bonus stage, you get a password. Now, you might think that that password will let you continue from where you left off. It does not. It lets you choose any of the 5 previous stages to start at. So, you complete the bonus stage at level 6, get the password, and you can choose if you want to start at levels 1 through 5. That does mean you need to complete the 5th level again, then the bonus stage again, and then you could start the new levels. And because you only have 5 lives to complete everything, it can be pretty nerve-wracking when you're on that 5th stage and have 1 life left. A lot of the levels do require that the enemies behave themselves. The aggressive movements of Abilor in particular can really get you. So there's times where you'll lose a life just due to sheer bad luck. When the game was released, DBsoft had a contest where players could send in passwords in order to get a prize. Just a little card signifying that they completed a certain number of stages. There were 4 of these in all. The problem for DBsoft is that all of the passwords were published in a magazine shortly after the game was released. That wasn't the only time that a magazine caused problems with Flappy either. Another magazine printed a fake trick where you could shoot mushrooms around the blue boulder on level 51 to trigger a special event. Obviously that does nothing, but it really worked up kids in 1985. Flappy is a game that has a reputation in Japan as a hidden gem for the Famicom. I'm not so sure about that myself. Even setting aside the rough graphical presentation, there's enormous variance in the difficulty of the stages. A lot of the stages are dependent upon those randomized enemy movements lining up just right. And that password system is a real mess. And then there's the music. You get your choice of 3 songs, but they're all unpleasant. Still, with those caveats, I think this is a solid mid-range puzzle game. If someone asked me what are the best hidden gems on the Famicom, it wouldn't even come up in my top 20. But it's fine for what it is. I think in preference though, I'd play the Game Boy port. I tend to find this kind of game better on the go. The first place I encountered an NES was at one of those store kiosks where they let you play games for a little while, and they have a push button that lets you select which game you're playing. Most of the kids who pushed in for a turn while their parents were shopping played Super Mario Brothers. But the game on that box that always intrigued me the most was Wrecking Crew. This was Nintendo's first pass at a puzzle game. I'm sure it was done in response to games like Lode Runner and Nuts and Milk. Lode Runner in particular seems to be a real inspiration here. But the thing is, Wrecking Crew didn't start out as a puzzle game. First, there was Versus Wrecking Crew, a game that was much more like Mario Brothers. It's similar to the Famicom version since the player's goal remains the same, but Versus Wrecking Crew is an action game, intended to be played on 2 screens, with each player interacting with a mirror image of the stage, a front and back view. The Famicom Wrecking Crew threw that out and made a better game for it. In Wrecking Crew, you control Mario, and your goal is to smash everything. Brick walls, smash them. Metal walls, smash them. Metal ladders, smash them. Everything else, well, some things you can smash, but those things you don't have to. Knock out all the targets on the stage to advance. Mario can't jump, so he might have to fall to some platforms or exit out one side of the stage to come out on the other. There's 3 enemies that are after Mario in Wrecking Crew. The most common ones are Spanagons. These kind of mechanical monsters actively chase Mario down. The red one is a bit faster and more aggressive than the purple one. More predictable are Nasubi Kamen, or masked eggplants. These guys just head in one constant direction and take every ladder that they come across. If they run into something that they can't go through, they turn around and go back. On some stages, there are metal doors that can be hammered open. The Spanagon and Nasubi Kamen can be lured through these doors to put them in the background. That's a holdover from Versus Wrecking Crew, where the doors caused the enemies to flip which player's screen they were on. Here, it just gives you a breather. The third enemy is Blackie. He fills in the Luigi role from Versus Wrecking Crew. And if he knocks down a piece that you're in front of, Mario will fall all the way to the bottom of the screen. However, you can do that to Blackie as well. Blackie is also who you face in the bonus stage, where you try to knock out the walls to locate a hidden coin. All you get out of the bonus stage is some extra points, so it's not really worth the effort. There aren't many options for attacking enemies, but there are a couple of tricks you can use to deal with them. On some stages you'll find steel barrels placed over I-beams. Knock out the I-beam when someone is close to you, and the barrel can land on them, trapping them inside. A more common option are the bombs. Hammer one of those and they explode, and anyone who's in front of it gets knocked all the way to the bottom. That's not always a bad thing for it to happen to you. It can be very useful for a quick getaway. The bomb detonates anything that's next to it and keeps going until there's an open space. So you can use it to clear out a whole row, or even set off bomb chain reactions. If you linger too long on a level, a fireball appears at the side of the screen and flies in. Sometimes when you've rendered a level uncompletable, you'll just have to eat the fireball to let it reset. Wrecking Crew came with 100 levels, and you're not likely to complete that in a sitting. On the title screen, you can press A and B to change what level you're starting at. So some gameplay tips. As a broad rule of thumb, it's easier to start at the top and work your way down. That's because you can always fall, but you can't always climb up. Along those same lines, keep an eye out for areas that can only be accessed through a metal ladder. Don't stand in front of that metal ladder when Blackie is around, because he will smash it. There are 2 big secrets in Wrecking Crew. Not every level has these features, so keep an eye out for them. The first are hidden Mario letters. On some stages, there are 5 letters spelling out Mario hidden behind objects. They have to be revealed in order. Blackie can reveal them as well, but he can also knock them out of order. If you manage to find all 5 letters in order, then you get an extra life. Probably not the most useful thing in a 100-level puzzle game where you're going to be starting at the level you left off at. The other secret's the big one. On some levels, if you destroy the correct bomb as the 3rd bomb, an item will appear. What item appears rotates every time you swing the hammer on the stage. The pig, Santa Claus, and the cat are just worth points. But then there's the Super Hammer. It was also nicknamed the Golden Hammer. When you collect the hammer, the music changes, telling you you've gone into a power-up mode. One swing of the hammer will destroy any object. You swing it very fast. Oh, and you can fly. By timing your swings, you can creep out over empty air and get to spots that are out of reach. And the real kicker of the Golden Hammer is that it lasts until you die. You carry it between levels. Getting the Golden Hammer can trivialize some of the more difficult puzzles in the game. Like in Hudson's puzzle games, Wrecking Crew includes an editor. But unlike Hudson's, it's got a better interface. It has 4 save slots. You can write the data out to the Famicom data recorder. And when you play these levels, it rotates through all 4 of them. You can even name your levels. It's surprisingly full-featured for a 1985 game. Looking over the puzzle games that we've gotten on the Famicom so far, I don't think Wrecking Crew beats Lode Runner, but it's close. It's a really solid game, and once you're past about level 40 or so, all of the stages become pretty complicated. I wouldn't pick it in preference to Super Mario Bros. Anymore, but I do like Wrecking Crew a lot. I've been lukewarm on Star Force. I used to play the NES version a bit, and thought it was fine, but not something exceptional. In Japan, Star Force is regarded as a bit of a minor classic. And I'm going, yeah, it's okay, I guess. Playing it in the context of the Famicom releases, though, Star Force is excellent. This is the most action-packed game that the Famicom has gotten so far. I totally get why someone playing in 1985 would be blown away by it. There's something I need to mention at the top, too. I had contradictory sources for the release date on Star Force. And in this case, they were contradictory Japanese sources. Sources from 1985 only indicated that the game would be released in June. So my best source on this was Hudson themselves. Hudson Best Collection Volume 5 for the GBA says that this was released on June 20th, so that's what I'm going with. Superficially, Star Force seems about as straightforward as any vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up can get. You shoot 2 shots forward, the only power-up you can collect lets you have twice as many shots on the screen at once. Enemies come at you in waves, and there are ground targets you can blow up. There's a lot of subtlety in Star Force, though. There aren't any fixed levels, for example. The terrain is randomly selected from what's appropriate for that area. Same thing for the enemy waves. There's a certain group of enemies that are assigned to each area, and those are the ones that randomly appear as you move through it. They also get more aggressive as the areas go on, firing more shots at you as they move through. You don't complete an area by covering a certain amount of distance. Instead, you complete it by shooting enough targets. Once sufficient targets are reached, the game rolls over to a base that you have to destroy. The bases aren't too tough. They just have a couple turrets around them and move back and forth. The areas are assigned by the Greek alphabet as well, so you'll see it goes alpha, beta, gamma. And since the area indicator only gives the first English letter, you'll see things like area E appear twice for epsilon and eta. If you manage to clear area omega, then the game goes into area infinity and just starts counting up numbers to go with that. The enemy behavior patterns in Star Force tend to be pretty complicated. Sure, you've got your basic ones that move in with a sine wave, or zip down to the bottom and then shoot back up. But there's 22 varieties of basic enemies in the game, and each of them have distinctive behavior. The toughest ones for me are the ones that explode into a fountain of bullets when you hit them, since they tend to restrict your movement an awful lot and show up in groups. The other nasty ones are the ones that attack from behind, since you can't really shoot them down as they swarm up from the bottom of the screen. Space gets filled with bullets quickly. When you're shooting, you can typically have 3 pairs of shots on screen at once. The game does auto-fire when you hold down the button, but the shot rate is very slow. You'll do better rapidly pushing it yourself. Of course, in a game as frantic as Star Force, you're going to exhaust yourself pretty quickly trying to do that. Which is why I switched over to a Joy Card. This is a Hudson manufactured controller for the Famicom that has a few levels of auto-fire. Hudson also released an arcade-style joystick at about the same time as Star Force. I don't have that one, I'm afraid, though. Star Force has a ton of ways to get bonus points. Easiest to find are the hidden panels. Just shoot these spots on the ground and an H appears, destroy the H, and you get 2,000 points. The Big B and Little B are things that you collect for bonus points at the end of each stage. Sometimes you'll see targets on the ground that are question marks. These are Magica, and for most of the group, they'll turn into frowny faces when shot. But some of them are smiley faces. Find the smiley face, get an extra life. There's a risk in shooting up that group, though. Instead of getting destroyed, these remain in place and block all your forward shots. Starting on stage 6, you might encounter terrain that's a ladder of arrow targets. Shoot 10 of these in a row for 80,000 points. The most valuable target of all is also the rarest. The Cleopatra bonus is obtained by finding a target in a late level, shooting it 16 times, then Cleopatra appears and you collect her for 1 million points. I've yet to encounter that structure myself. Both the difficulty of playing those high levels and the randomness of it appearing, I think, conspire against me. And then there's Larios. You'll encounter Larios pretty early on in the game. The music will suddenly change to be ominous, and then a circle will gently descend from the top of the screen. 4 smaller objects appear at the edges around it, and when the circle flashes, they rush in to complete a diamond. When you destroy Larios, that triggers the power-up to appear. But there's a special bonus point with Larios as well. When the core flashes, if you shoot it 8 times, you'll destroy it before it forms. That's worth 50,000 points. However, if you shoot early, then it doubles the number of hits it takes to destroy Larios. This is super tough to do without an auto-fire controller, but it is possible. There's one more special enemy bonus to talk about, and that's Gerard. These tough little guys tend to arrive with another group of enemies. And if you pop him, then he destroys all of the enemies on the screen. I've even seen Gerard come in as a wave, but that's pretty rare. With Star Force, Hudson's finally gone away from trying to copy Nintendo's Pulse line label. While they kind of look like everyone else's Famicom carts now, I still think it's an improvement. There will be a Famicom sequel to Star Force called Super Star Force. The title screen credits the original design for Star Force to Tekkon, and they're the ones who developed the arcade game. Even before this game was released, Tekkon would change their name to Tecmo. We're going to be seeing a lot of shoot-'em-ups in these early Famicom years, and Star Force really is exceptional. It throws a ton of enemies at you constantly. There's a huge variety of stuff. And there's some cool stuff that you can try to do for extra points. It also ramps up the difficulty pretty quickly. I think a real case could be made that as of June 20th, 1985, this is the best Famicom game. Spartan X has a bit of a weird history behind it. If you're familiar with the game under that title, then you're probably aware that it's a licensed game based on the Jackie Chan movie Wheels on Meals. Irem made the arcade game, which was released in the US as Kung Fu Master. They were going to port it to the Famicom, but Nintendo wanted to do it themselves, so we've got about another week before this show reaches Irem's first game. Nintendo wound up releasing the game in the US as just Kung Fu. So what did they have to change to remove the Wheels on Meals license? The caricature of Jackie Chan on the cover. Everything else is identical. The names Thomas and Sylvia are the names of Jackie Chan's and Lola Forner's characters from the movie, but that's the only thing that Spartan X the game shares with Spartan X the movie. Sylvia is not even Thomas's love interest in the film. I strongly suspect that this is a different game that Irem was working on when they got the Spartan X license and just put the title on it. So we actually have a plot for this one, including cutscenes. Sylvia has been kidnapped by Mr. X, and Kung Fu Master Thomas has to climb to the 5th story of his pagoda to defeat Mr. X and get Sylvia back. That makes this a first for the Famicom. This is the first time we have the kidnapped girlfriend plot. Thomas can punch and kick his way through the foes. There's low, mid, and jumping versions of each attack as well, giving him a grand total of 6 attacks. The jumping punch isn't particularly useful, though. Thomas has to go in a zigzag path to get to the top floor. As he walks toward the stairs, Tsukami-nan will rush in from either side to grab him. That name just means grappler. While they're holding on to Thomas, his life is drained away, and you'll have to hit the attack button repeatedly to break their grip. Kicks have a longer reach to intercept them, but you score less points for striking with them. Punches score more points, but the most points are scored by using a jump kick. Though I found the jump kick to be a bit flaky. Other common enemies are the knife nages, or throwers, who will throw a knife either high or low, and have a terrible tendency to run away as Thomas approaches them. On higher floors, there's also the diminutive tom-tom. Low attacks will dispatch them, but they sometimes jump up and land on your head. The first half of floors 2 and 4 have special enemies. Floor 2 has pots drop from the ceiling onto Thomas, and they can release poisonous snakes or dragons. There's also a hovering ball that will explode unless you jump kick it. On floor 4, poisonous moths get released to chase you down. In general, it's better to just run from those rather than try to knock them all out of the sky. Finally, each floor has a boss. On the first floor, it's Bojutsuka, a staff wielder. The second floor's boss is the boomerang wielder. Not only do the boomerangs return to him when they're thrown, sometimes they come back at a different height. The third floor boss is just called the Super Strong Man. His massive blows can take you down fast. The fourth floor is ruled by the Yojutsu, or Black Magic Master. He throws fireballs that may turn into moths, and if you kick him, his head can come off and he'll teleport away. I find him to be the toughest of the floor bosses. Naturally, the fifth floor of the pagoda is controlled by Mr. X, another Kung Fu master who has all the moves Thomas does. If you defeat him, Thomas and Sylvia are reunited. and then you return to the first floor of the pagoda to do it again. So those bosses look pretty tough, but they do have a secret weakness. Low kicks. It doesn't work on everyone, but generally crouching and hitting low kick rapidly will catch the bosses. Mr. X can't do anything against it. Something you may notice as you play is that your progress is counted at the top of the screen. Watch the lanterns. They're counting 1 through 6 in Chinese characters. The boss is always located at lantern 6. Some more gameplay tips. You can jump over the high knife, but it's pretty tricky to do. On the second floor, it's safer to destroy the pots as they fall. You can punch out the dragon, but don't try to kick the snakes. If TomTom tries to jump on you, you can jump as well and that will knock them out of the air. Don't die after you beat the boss, then you just have to do the floor over again. Finally, the biggest secret of them all, there's a way to score 5,000 points off of any enemy. Every 12th enemy, if you defeat that one with a jump kick, it scores 5,000 points. It's easiest to do on the first floor as you can quickly count the enemies as you go and jump kick on the 12th. Weirdly enough, this game was released twice in Japan. Once as Spartan X, and then after they lost the license, it was released as Kung Fu. The Famicom Kung Fu card is a bit hard to find. Irem would eventually make a sequel to Spartan X, even though there is no movie sequel. There's another schoolyard rumor on this one. If you defeat Mr. X on the 24th lap, since X is the 24th level, Sylvia attacks you as the true final boss. The source of this story is the comic Famicom Rocky, which was the source for a lot of bad information for kids in the 80s. As for Spartan X itself, I don't like this game. There isn't enough variety in what you can do, the bosses are too vulnerable, and a lot of times when you get hit, it feels like it's being cheap rather than you screwing up. Like you'll have a knife thrower approach while you're in the middle of fighting the boss, or a TomTom will jump up on top of you while you're busy hitting someone else and so you can't jump up to block it. The controls seem to be a bit flaky too. If you want to turn around and attack someone immediately behind you, there's a little bit of a delay as you do that. I really liked this game as a kid, but these days, it just doesn't do anything for me. First things first, Hyper Olympic is not track and field. I know I put track and field on the title card and in the description box, but it's not track and field. Track and field is actually a merger of Hyper Olympic and its sequel, Hyper Sports. So don't be surprised that I'm only covering half of the events of track and field when I talk about Hyper Olympic. Hyper Olympic, of course, started out as a very popular arcade game. Well, popular with players at least. Arcade operators had to deal with the problem that the machines tended to get beaten up pretty badly. The key to playing Hyper Olympic is hitting the run button as fast as you can. And even if it wasn't kids slamming those buttons as hard as possible, lots of people used other methods to hit the buttons, which tended to damage the artwork, wear down the buttons, and ruin the machine. Rather than have players destroy their hardwired Famicom controllers, Hyper Olympic came with a special controller called the Konami Hyper Shot, and it does not work with the standard Famicom controllers. But as you can see on mine, that didn't stop kids from destroying them. I've read that some auto-fire controllers for the Famicom can work with Hyper Olympic, but none of the ones I have do. Maybe by the time I get around to the sequel in 3 weeks, I'll have gotten one in that will work. I kind of hope so because Hyper Olympic killed my arm. There are just 4 events in Hyper Olympic: the 100-meter dash, the long jump, the 110-meter hurdle, and the javelin throw. For all of the events, you just smash that run button as fast as you can to build up speed. Then the other button jumps or throws at the appropriate time. In the long jump and the javelin toss, holding down the button increases the angle. Optimally, you're going for 45 degrees, but there's a lot of variation. The races place you against a computer opponent or another player, and the computer opponent has some of the worst rubber banding I've ever seen. If you are going for the best time, you probably will not be able to beat the computer. On the other hand, if you hold back a bit and wait until about the 85-meter mark, then start slamming the button, you'll probably win. For the long jump and the javelin toss, you have 3 tries to beat the qualifying distance. In the foot races, you can jump the gun, but only do that 3 times before you get a game over. If you qualify in all 4 events, then it starts over with the qualifying a little bit higher. And naturally, Game B starts out at round 2 of this. Something interesting to note is that the world records in the game are the actual world records when the game was released. Obviously, they've all been beaten since then. Hyper Olympic was used in a sketch on a popular television show where one of the reoccurring characters was placed into the game. People liked it so much that Konami released it for real as Hyper Olympic Tono-sama Edition in 1986. That version added some improvements from track and field, like the ability to select what event you want. But the key feature was replacing Player 1's character with Tono-sama, a goofy feudal lord. Rather than make new packaging for it, Konami just put a sticker on the cart and box. This would not be the last time the publisher would re-release a Famicom sports game with small modifications by placing a sticker on the cart and box. And that's literally all there is to Hyper Olympic. I can tell you that as I played, I didn't use any special techniques or outside assistance to hit the button faster. You can tell because I'm not setting world records on every single event. And I really don't find the game to be that much fun. Mash one button as hard as you can and then occasionally press and hold another button. It just doesn't do it for me. You either cheat and just get a high score through no technique, or you play regularly and not have a lot of fun. I will say that this is a case where the US version is significantly better than the Famicom version. The Famicom one just feels like half a game. Well, we had to run into them someday. Elevator Action is the first Famicom game with development by Micronix. I can, have, and will say a lot of terrible things about Tosei, but Micronix really is the bottom of the barrel. The thing is, Elevator Action might be their best work on the system. It pretty closely resembles Taito's arcade game, and if you played it for only 5 or 10 minutes, you might not realize that there's something wrong here. Elevator Action is about a spy who enters a building at its top floor and has to get to his car at the bottom. Along the way, you enter these red doors to collect intelligence, and while you're doing that, enemy spies emerge from other doorways to shoot at you. You'll primarily have to use the elevators to get around the building, though there are some escalators too. The elevators are both a help and a hazard. You can ride on the roof of an elevator car, but you risk getting squished by the ceiling. Also, you can't duck while you're in an elevator, so you might not be able to shoot an enemy before they shoot you. You can jump over an empty elevator shaft, but not an elevator shaft that has the cable in it. so only when the elevator is above you. Of course, you can also use the elevators to squish the enemy spies, but if you're underneath one and they're coming down, well, that's not supposed to happen. That's Micronics for you. If you miss any of the red doors on your trip through the building and reach the car, you get sent back up to the highest red door you didn't open. Shooting out the light seems like it might help you get through the building, but the only thing darkness gets you is a higher score when you shoot enemies. You can drop a light on them, though. Interacting with objects can be a little bit tricky. You have to stand on the little platform in front of the red door, face the door, and then you'll just enter it. And you'll remain in that room until you push the direction to walk out again. Open doors block shots too, so it can be helpful to time your exit. The escalators can be even more troublesome. You move on them by standing on the pad and pressing up or down. But let's say enemies emerge from the doors and start shooting as you're going down the escalator. You might want to press down immediately once you get to the bottom to crouch under the shot. Then you have to press up to stand up again. Except pressing up sends you up the escalator again. You can jump to break this cycle, but you're probably going to do this a few times before you get used to it. There's only 4 stages in elevator action, and the only difference between them is the color of the walls. The position of the red door, which elevator shaft leads to the basement, and if there's a double elevator in a shaft, those are all randomized every time. And that actually wraps it up here. I like the arcade elevator action a lot, but this is not a strong port. There's lots of bugs and quirks to it. It just doesn't feel quite right. We're going to see much worse done to much better games by Micronics, but this is not a good start. After playing Field Combat, I had to go check. Yes, there are some good Jaleco Famicom games. But with 4 releases in 5 months, and the high water is Ninja-kun, let's just say Jaleco isn't leaving a good impression at this point. Field Combat was actually a brand new arcade game when the Famicom game was released. It reached arcades about 6 weeks ahead of the home version. Not that you could really tell. It feels like it could be a game from 1981. Theoretically, Field Combat works like reverse Galaga. You control that spaceship-like vehicle, and you can fire missiles with the A button that explode at the crosshair, or you can fire a capture beam by pressing a B button that will suck in enemy troops and put them on your side. You unleash your forces by pressing the A and B buttons simultaneously, and whatever troop is shown in the lower right-hand corner is what comes out to fight. That doesn't sound too bad, right? Kind of a proto-real-time strategy crossed with a shoot-'em-up? The problem is, none of these systems work in a way that makes gameplay fun. You start with 3 of every unit, and can have a maximum of 6 units out on the field at once. So right off the bat, there isn't much need to use the capture beam. It's also really difficult to handle what's coming out. You need troops right then. You don't need them in 10 seconds when it rotates over to the correct unit. So what troop deployment really amounts to is, if you have a large enough group in front of you, you throw out whatever unit is active at the moment. If you start to lose troops, but aren't in a desperate situation, then you watch for whatever unit you're currently fighting on the stage to come up in rotation and release them, because you can always refill that. Targeting in the game is a mess too. You only hit where the crosshair is, and it takes your missiles a while to get there. The same holds true for the capture beam, but once you fire the capture beam, you're locked in place. Even once you've captured a unit, you're still locked in place, unable to do anything for a few moments after it completes. That's a pretty long process, and if an enemy happens to spawn off screen and walk in to attack you while you're in the middle of it, you're probably dead. The one saving grace of that terrible targeting system is that it goes for enemy shots as well, so they can fly over you before they explode. Occasionally, the enemy release a UFO of their own to capture one of your troops. You can shoot it down for some bonus points, but life is cheap in field combat. You can recover that troop in a heartbeat, so who cares? Let them capture them. You'll just capture the other 3 guys who are there to replace them. There are 5 different troops you can deploy in field combat. The generically named Soldier, who fights on foot. The tanks Hell 99A. The anti-aircraft piece FL 880. The armored cars Keith. And the helicopter Louis. The thing is, I didn't really notice a whole lot of difference between any of these units. You can't really deploy them tactically. So even if there was a significant difference between them, I never see it. So you've crawled your way up the battlefield, and at the top of each of them is the enemy fortress. 4 turrets that have to be shot down. They're actually not that hard to bait once you can actually get up the battlefield. Once all 4 are destroyed, you drive into the gap and the enemy surrenders. There's 6 different battlefields in field combat. Each have slightly different obstacles. They all have the same general layout though, of 2 screen heights with the fortress at the top. The real challenge is making any progress at all, because at the start of the stage, enemy troops will just flood on screen. And every time you destroy one, another one will just walk in. So you're often stuck in place for a while at the start of stages, until you've cleared out enough troops that you can roll forward a bit. Before I end this, I have to mention the music in field combat. I hope you like the first few measures of Ride of the Valkyries played over and over again. Let's just say it wears thin very quickly. And that's really all I have to say about field combat. This is a nothing game. Japanese sources barely acknowledge that this game exists. I can hardly blame them. Field combat is slow, clunky, none of the mechanics interact well. The control scheme is something that you'd have to look up. This one was not a fun experience. The first game I ever wrote was a top-down racer. And by wrote, I mean copied from a book of basic programs. The goal was simple. Keep the block representing your car from running into the sides of the ever-winding road. Konami's Road Fighter is better than that game that I copied from that book in 2 regards. First, they actually have graphics instead of relying on the Commodore's extended character set. Second, there are slightly more obstacles. But at the end of the day, it really isn't that far from that simple little game written in less than 100 lines of BASIC that I typed into a computer. I think I can make a pretty good case that Road Fighter is Konami's worst Famicom game. The thing is, though, this is a perfectly reasonable, albeit very slight, game for 1985. It looks pretty good on the Famicom. It's got some fast gameplay. It just doesn't have a whole lot to it. Hence why I spent the first minute of this video mainly talking about Commodore 64 basic programs. You could play it, enjoy it, and then completely forget about it 10 minutes later. So if this is the bottom of Konami's output, then we have a lot of good stuff coming from them. For a game named Road Fighter, there's very little fighting on this road. Instead, it's a 4-leg road race. Just get from the start to the finish before your gas tank runs dry. and even if it does run dry, you can still coast across that finish line. You can get a little bit more gas by running into the rainbow cars that you'll sometimes see on the road. It's only about 2 extra seconds of fuel, though. For the other vehicles, the orange cars just drive straight ahead. The blue cars will move, but not necessarily in any direction. And the red cars will actively try to block your progress. The semis also just keep going in a straight line. You'll also encounter oil slicks and potholes in the road. If you get bumped, you start spinning out of control, but you can recover this by just turning into the skid. That's an easier said than done thing, since it feels more natural to push in the direction that you want to go. Also, you might already be pushing in that direction when you get bumped. If you skid off the edge of the road, then you crash, but that just costs you a little bit of time. You're not the only one who can get bumped. You can bump other cars off the road as well. There really isn't a reason to do that, though. Your car has 2 gears. Low gear is the B button, and accelerates up to 200 kilometers per hour. And high gear is the A button, and accelerates to 400 kilometers per hour. Maybe the most notable thing about Road Fighters is that it's the first Famicom appearance of Konami Man, Konami's superhero mascot that will turn up all the time. To see him, all you have to do is drive for a while without crashing, roughly half the length of the course. There's really not much more I can say about Road Fighter. It's a very slight game that's essentially a reflexes test. I personally have a bad tendency to get it mixed up with another much worse top-down racing game that we're going to see in the next few days. It's not a bad game, it's just very middle of the pack. There's just nothing in Road Fighter that stands out, and I probably would have completely overlooked it if it wasn't for the fact that it was published by Konami. Namco game number 8? What happened to game number 7? Well, I don't have any definitive answer on this, but game 7 is Namco's largest game to date. My guess is that the scope of the project just led to a month's delay, while the smaller, simpler Warpman could be brought forward into a July release. Warpman is a sequel to the arcade game Warp. Some people call it an enhanced remake, but my feeling is that there's enough new features in Warpman that it's a sequel. Warpman is an attempt to merge 2 genres of gameplay. There's an arena shooter where you run around the screen trying to knock out the aliens, and there's a Bomberman-like maze where you plant explosives to take out the aliens. As the name implies, you can warp between these. You have to collect an item to do this. On the shooting stage, doing this makes the center black hole flash, and then you can go inside. If the black hole isn't flashing, you can still walk on top of it, though. On the bombing stage, a portal appears, and you do have to bomb it to make it open. Why would you want to go through the portal? Well, changing stages powers you up until the end of the stage. If you go from the shooting stage to the bombing stage, then your bombs explode in a radius rather than just across. And if you go from the bombing stage to the shooting stage, then your ray gun becomes a missile launcher. On every level, your goal is to eliminate a certain number of aliens. Once that number is defeated, you still have to clear out the field in order to progress. There's 48 stages in all before things start to repeat. The alien monsters are called Bemu, and I think it's supposed to be a take on the sci-fi abbreviation BEM for Bug-Eyed Monster. There are 3 basic types of Bemu. Pero are the tongued ones, and they're the most basic type of enemy that appears. Dope are the round ones, and they occasionally lay eggs that hatch into more dope. Finally, there's the Goramo. When they're closed up, they can't be injured. The Bemu rotate through colors often, and if you shoot 3 of the same type and color of them in a row, then a special Bemu appears at the corner of the screen and walks along one edge before vanishing again. These are worth more points the further away you shoot them from. Most importantly, sometimes these appear with letters. The letters spell extra, and if you collect all 5 letters, you get an extra life. Here's the thing, though. The letter that they appear with is chosen randomly, and they don't always appear with one. I did a basic statistical analysis and found that on average, 9 monsters with letters have to appear before you collect enough letters for extra. Of course, that's just average. The mode was 7, but I was seeing counts as high as 30. If you're actively trying to get the extra Bemu to appear, then in my experience you get 2 letters per stage. So assuming you collect all of them, you have to get through 5 stages before you're statistically likely to have earned an extra life. Of course, if you're just trying to survive, you could go a lot longer without seeing letters. The shooting gameplay is pretty straightforward, but the bombing gameplay does have one special feature. The bombs last longer the longer you hold down the fire button. So press and hold the fire button for a long time, you get a longer bomb fuse. The longer the fuse, the greater the chance that the bomb will stick to a Bemu that walks over it. So there's an advantage to placing long fuses in the paths of the aliens. But if you're running through a cluster, then you might want to plant a whole line of bombs. Warpman has a 2-player simultaneous mode, and much like Mario Brothers, the players can interfere with each other. In the shooting stage, shooting the other player stuns them for a second. Warpman is a game that seems to have left almost no impression in Japan. It's definitely a, oh yeah, that exists kind of game. Back in the 80s, there was a board game released for it as part of a line of mini games that cost 200 yen each. It's just a spin and move game, so it doesn't really look like a lot of fun. As for my impressions of Warpman, well, I like the fact that it's a simple game so I can keep the video short. But in terms of gameplay, it still feels pretty primitive. Despite the power-up that you get from warping, I find it easier to just stay on the shooting stage. The aliens' movements are too erratic on the bombing stage for me to really catch them easily. Whereas on the shooting stage, they move regularly, and I have a much easier time. It winds up feeling like 2 half-thought-out games jammed together into one. Warpman is the weakest game we've seen from Namco so far, and given the high quality of their output, it's a shame. The Famicom is now 2 years old, and we have the debut of 2 new publishers for the system. I'm starting with Irem, as they're the more prolific of the 2 publishers. Irem had a distinctive cart style that for the first few years addressed a deficiency in the Famicom. There was no indicator to tell you that the Famicom was on. Well, Irem put an LED front and center on their cartridges. They also put instructions on how to play the game and a spot to write your name on the back. I looked at Road Fighter a couple of days ago. That was a very slim game concept done solidly. Zippy Race is that game's counterpart. It's another top-down racer where players go from leg to leg between cities, but it's that very slim idea done terribly. Zippy Race is a 5-leg race, and you start out with the slowest motorcycle possible. If you complete all 5 legs, then it restarts with a faster motorcycle for you. But you can see how painfully slow the motorcycle that you start with is. It makes Zippy Race feel not very zippy. Of course, it has to go slow because they zoomed the view way in. Even at this slow pace, the way it zoomed in, you barely have time to react to curves. And then there are the other drivers. All of them try to run you off the road, move faster than your motorcycle, and will continue to move to block your motorcycle until you're just barely behind them. There's no point in trying to maneuver through traffic, because what you have to do is wait until they stop moving so you can get around them. Crashing in Zippy Race costs you fuel. If that tank runs out, then it's game over. But because the fuel expense for a crash is so high, it's far more efficient to slow down even further when you're dealing with traffic, especially on curves. Of course, you still might just get boxed in to the point that you can't maneuver and escape. You do need to pass as many cars as possible because at the end of each leg, your ranking in the race determines how much fuel you get back. There are gas cans scattered along the course to pick up, but the fuel you gain back from them is minimal, not even one crash's worth. Also on the course are these white strips where they're considered to be wheelie zones. You can't really tell that you're doing a wheelie when you run into one though. On some courses there will be these rivers that you have to cross, and sometimes there's a spot that you can trigger to jump over them. The race runs on the grassy roads between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, the desert highways between Vegas and Houston, the grassy fields between Houston and St. Louis, the vast desert between St. Louis and Chicago, and finally more grassy roads between Chicago and New York. So let's just say there isn't a lot of verisimilitude in the course design. As you near the destination, it changes from an overhead view to a behind-the-bike view, but you still have to pass cars. Passing those cars doesn't affect your race ranking, but you still have to pass them. I don't know how a racing game simultaneously feels like it's going too slow and has objects come up on you too quickly, but Zippy Race pulled it off somehow. With the cars taking up so much space and always behaving the exact same way to block you, it makes Zippy Race not a lot of fun to play. The lack of track variety doesn't help either. This one belongs in the bottom tier of the Famicom games we've seen so far. The other new Famicom publisher on July 18th is a small one. They only released 7 games for the platform. Of course, if you average the sales per game, I think it works out to about 2 million copies each. Developer Chunsoft isn't exactly a slouch either. They made most of Enix's Famicom games, and had a few big hits for other publishers too. So what's the first game from the companies that effectively invented the JRPG and visual novel genres? A single-screen platform action arcade-style game. Despite appearances, Door started on the PC-88 platform rather than in arcades. It was the result of a programming contest NX held, and it was won by Koichi Nakamura. Nakamura took his royalties from Door and used them to found Chunsoft. One of their first jobs was the Famicom port of Door, and it was so successful that they decided to concentrate on just the Famicom. So Door is literally the reason that we have Dragon Quest. Let's get into the game itself, and this is another one that's simple to describe but with lots of interesting variations. Chun is the little guy in the baseball hat that you control. He's being chased by a bunch of monsters, but fortunately there's all these doors. When you run past a door, if the handle is on the side that you're starting from, you'll pull it open. And if there's one thing monsters love, it's going through open doors. When a monster goes inside, Chun can pull the door shut behind them. The handle breaks off, locking the monster in, but preventing the door from being reopened. If the door isn't shut, the monster eventually wanders back out. The more monsters you can trap behind a door, the more points you get for it. trap all the monsters, and you move on to the next stage. Door has 50 stages in all, and you only have 3 lives to clear them. That's gotten Door a reputation as one of the hardest Famicom games. And if you want a challenge, I do recommend Door. Unlike Lode Runner Championship Edition, Door's challenge comes from requiring skillful play. One of the keys to that is learning the aliens. They all have unique patterns as they move through the levels, and you can learn to manipulate them. The slug-like aliens are Namegon, and they go directly toward Chun. They have a counterpart, the tadpole-like Otapyons, who have the same movement pattern, but jump when Chun jumps. The octopus-like Isobe likes to go up ladders, and if it encounters an up ladder in between itself and Chun, he heads on up. His counterpart is the blobby Ame-chan, who goes down ladders when they're in between her and Chun. Besides knowing their movements, another trick is to use the doors to control the spacing. You can lure an alien through a door, and then use the timing on their re-entry to group the aliens more closely. Occasionally items will appear on the stage. You can collect the candy for extra points, but touching the bomb is deadly. Later levels of Door have metal ladders that the aliens can't climb on, and slides that you can go down but the aliens can go up. And since this is an early platformer, you can't fall great distances. So Door is a pretty simple game, but I think it presents an interesting challenge. It's pretty fun to play and try to rack up a high score. I don't know if I'll ever play it to level 50, but I think I'm okay with that. One more thing before I wrap up. Is it me, or does this game look like it was originally for an Apple II? It's the purple, green, and white color palette, I think. Super Arabian is a train wreck. I know that's a harsh way to start this video, but when you're just looking at footage of me playing, it comes across as just a lower tier but not especially bad single screen arcade game. So I wanted to say that first. This game plays terribly, and it's a bit representative of the new wave of publishers coming in and dumping out any crap on the system because it's going to sell 100,000 copies no matter what. We're getting deep into the Famicom doldrums here that resulted from its enormous popularity. Super Arabian is Sunsoft's first Famicom game, and just like so many of these other big publishers we see coming on board in 1985, they start out weak, but improve over time. Super Arabian was an arcade game first, though that arcade game was just called Arabian. I've been trying to work out why the Famicom game got the Super applied to it, but the only thing that comes to mind is that it could be sarcastic. Super Arabian is a single-screen arcade game in which your goal is to collect all of the pots on the stage. You can climb things, hang from some things, and kick monsters out of the way. All of the pots are assigned a letter, and if you collect them in an order that spells out the word for the stage, you get 5,000 bonus points when it's over. The ultimate goal is to rescue the kidnapped Princess Leia, who is awaiting for you at the end of the 4th stage. Save her, and it starts over again at a little bit higher difficulty. In later rounds, the pots might have question marks instead of the actual letters on them, and you have to collect this H to reveal what the letters are. And on even further rounds, the effect of that H only lasts a few seconds. There are 3 types of monsters that oppose you, but 2 of them are effectively identical. Since the rocks are birds, you might think that they'd fly around, but they walk around on the ground and drop down. That's the exact same behavior as the slimy Binkies. They've got a name that makes me wonder if it was supposed to be Pinkies. Sometimes the rocks and Binkies can grow to giant size, and then they zoom straight at the player. You can't attack the monsters as they're forming, so you'll just have to jump over them or go around. A kicked monster flies off the screen, and it'll take any monsters that are behind it with it. If 3 or more monsters go off the screen at once, a ball flies back in. Collect that ball to become invincible for a short time. If you're taking a while on a stage, the ghostly Gulba may emerge from a jar and attack. It flies around and shoots fireballs at you. You don't have to start with level 1 in Super Arabian. From the title screen, you can press A and B to select which level you'll start at. That's helpful since once you rescue the princess, you get a secret letter. Collect all 8 to spell a word, send it on a postcard to Sunsoft, and you're entered into a drawing where you could win an MSX computer. Now that we've cleared away the basics, let's get to the hardcore complaining. The most trivial of these complaints are that the jump and attack button are backward. Jump is B and attack is A. That actually doesn't bother me that much, but I know it gets on some people's nerves. The player's kick is barely functional. There's a lot of deaths I took while recording where I was kicking the monster and the kick didn't occur. It would play the sound effect for the kick, but the kick never happened. Of course, all the hitboxes are flaky. Yours, the monsters, platforms. It's especially bad when it comes to you or the monsters on vines or on moving platforms. On top of that, the graphics don't match how the players interact with the backgrounds. This is most notable on the second stage, where you could just fall suddenly even though you're climbing on the vines. Stages 1 and 2 are rough, but they're straightforward. It's stages 3 and 4 that especially earn my ire. Mostly that comes down to requiring that the player take the carpets up to the first platform. You have to jump back and forth between 3 carpets before you have a chance to reach solid ground. The carpets have to line up closely, and as you move up all 4, you have to hope that the collision detection works. Monsters landing on carpets change the rate at which they move, so it's not like they're in sync for a pattern and stay that way. And on the 4th stage, the window for being able to get up to the platform is incredibly small. Also, visually these stages are a mess. It's hard to tell where you can move and what you can jump onto. And to cap it all off, see this brown line on stage 4? If you go above it, you can't go back down. And sometimes the first letter of the pots you have to collect is above it. I actually have a certain nostalgic fondness for the original Arabian arcade game. I know it's not very good, but I just still kind of have some affection for it. Super Arabian, on the other hand, is just flat out terrible. So confession time up front, I do not have a Famicom robot, or even its NES counterpart Rob. I can't say I even have any desire to get one. So I can't actually play block, which means that this video is mainly going to be descriptive. That's the way it goes with cataloging games. Sometimes all you can do is describe them. First up, this game actually has 4 titles. What is written on the cartridge is block, so that's what I'm going with. On the title screen, it's called Robot Block. On the package, it's called Block Set. And of course, when the Famicom card is stuck into a converter and placed in an NES cartridge case, it's called Stack Up. There is no distinct US version of this game, by the way. All NES copies are the Famicom board stuck into a NES cartridge. The game mainly acts as an interface for the Famicom robot. The The player does something, it flashes a pattern on the screen that gets the robot to respond. Although designed for the American market, the robot is an iconic 1980s toy in Japan. Block came with a set of discs and platforms that attach to the robot, and the goal of all the game modes in it is to start from one pattern and change it to another. The game has no way to know that you've completed this, so if you just press start, then it takes you at your word that you've finished and it gives you points. All the patterns are randomly generated, so it's not like there's multiple levels. You just keep doing it until you're done. Direct mode is a straight remote control. Dr. Hector bounces on buttons and the robot responds. Memory works a bit like the board game Robo Rally. You use the A and B buttons to select what you want to do, and then jump onto the button to program that into memory. Once you have it all set, hit start, and watch it play back. The final mode is Bingo. In it, you have to complete a line in order to input a command, but there's some monsters around the board that will flip buttons. There aren't any lives. Getting touched by one of the monsters just pops you to the edge. So this is just a little bit more complicated way of giving inputs, set up in such a manner where you'll get some wrong things sometimes. And that's everything to it. The last time I played Stack Up was 1988, so I don't remember it well enough to say anything about how it played. But my impression is that the game exists entirely as a remote control. The thing that gets me the most about Frontline is that apparently Taito did this one to themselves. Frontline makes just about every mistake possible in game design, so I'd expect it from someplace like Tosei or Micronix. But Taito knows how to make games. Frontline is one of Taito's early arcade games, and it's most notable for using a rotary dial to let players aim. The arcade game isn't really remembered at all by people. The Famicom version, on the other hand, well, it was mainly remembered because it was the game that lets you shoot people in the crotch. This is the first Famicom game in which you kill other humans, and it caused a moral panic in Japan when it was released. The similarly themed field combat had the soldiers you shot get up and run away afterwards. In Frontline, you control a lone commando in an unspecified war who has to march up the field to the enemy base. Although the manual doesn't give any details, the fact that you're in blue and your enemy are in green make me think that you're a Chinese soldier fighting off the Japanese Imperial Army. One of the big issues with Frontline is the shooting. Your bullet emerges from your gun, but your gun has huge swings in position depending on what direction you're moving in. Using that giant sprite with the weirdly bendy gun makes the shooting far more difficult than it needs to be. Vehicular combat's a little bit better. You can get into either an armored car or a tank. Both vehicles make the shooting much easier to manage. If you're hit, you'll need to jump out before the vehicle explodes. And it's possible to jump out straight into an enemy that kills you instantly. You can jump right back into a smoking vehicle, and it's immediately repaired. I'm pretty sure that one's a bug. If you're in an area where enemy vehicles spawn, a random friendly vehicle for you to get into will appear. Enemy vehicles have to be taken out by grenades when you're on foot, so just march north half a screen and get into an actual vehicle. There's only ever 2 enemies on the screen, and they wander in randomly from a point on the side, and if they ever go off the screen, then they're instantly despawned. Enemies keep coming forever, too, so you need to just keep going up. Your long march north has you pass through 4 terrains: the hedgerows, the open fields, a rocky field, and a set of brick walls. You have to be almost the entire way off the screen in order to force it to scroll. So enemies will appear right on top of you. There is horizontal scrolling in this game, but it's a situation where you never have to use it, so why would you go that way? Scrolling is dangerous enough in one direction. When you reach the far end of the map, you'll encounter an enemy bunker. The only thing that can take out the bunker are grenades. Shots from a tank won't do it. When you destroy the bunker, the enemy surrenders, and then you start all over again. The enemy troops get a bit faster, but the map layout is exactly the same. That difficulty increase occurs for 5 loops, and then the game stays at a constant difficulty. Not much more that can be said about Frontline. Visually it's a mess, gameplay-wise it's a mess. The scary part is it's the best of the 3 military combat games that were released on the Famicom around this time. When you start poking into Japanese retro games, there's a title that comes up an awful lot. Druaga. If you've got a really good memory, you might go, wasn't that an arcade game? Tower of Druaga never got a lot of attention in the United States. In Japan, though, Tower of Druaga is one of the foundational video games. In August 1985, this was the reason to get a Famicom. You control Gil, the Golden Knight, climbing to the top of Druaga's tower to rescue his love Kai, who has been turned into a stone. Not turned to stone, turned into a stone. Every floor in the tower is a maze, and Gil has to collect a key to unlock the door to the next floor. Naturally, there are monsters wandering the floors too. Gil has a sword, but he doesn't just swing it out. You hold down the attack button and he'll hold it in front of him. He also possesses a shield that can block magic spells. When the sword is held out, then the shield is held to his left. The starting position for Gil, the key, the exit door, and the monsters are all randomized every time you play. The maze layouts, on the other hand, remain consistent. The tower has 60 floors, a number that was selected to match the height of the tallest building in Japan when it was made. You almost definitely won't be clearing that without continuing. The true challenge of Druaga, however, are the treasures. Every stage has a treasure, and you'll have to collect most of them in order to complete the game. The treasure chest will appear where Gil starts on a level, and all he has to do to get it is walk over it. Then the question becomes, how do you get the chest to appear? And the answer is that it's something different and special on every stage. It might be something that you just stumble onto playing naturally. Like on the first stage, the chest appears when you kill the slime monsters. You'll probably do that anyways. Later floors tend to have more esoteric requirements, like stand on the door and then start killing all the monsters on the floor. You can always go on without collecting the treasure from a floor, but most of the treasures are needed to do things like fight the monsters, pass through barriers, or even see some obstacles. You're going to get stymied pretty quickly unless you start collecting them. And that's kind of the intention of Tower of Druaga. You're supposed to be keeping notes, working out how to collect each treasure, and talking with your friends on the playground, see what they've figured out. Or I suppose you could use a guide. The manual actually has no detail on the treasures, so you are on your own to figure out what they do. But I'm here. I can tell you some of them. The pickaxe is the treasure you'll find on the first floor. if you stand still in front of a wall and press the attack button, you'll knock the wall down. It can only be used a certain number of times per floor before it's destroyed. It refreshes between floors though, so you can keep using it. The boots on the second floor double your walking speed. Gil moves pretty slow without them, and you don't have enough time to complete later stages without them. Naturally, stronger swords will let you defeat enemies more quickly. The candles make ghosts visible. Without the appropriate one, they'll be shooting at you and you won't see them coming. There's a few different types of potions in the game. Some of them increase your strength for just that floor. Some of them weaken you for just that floor. Some will give you an extra life. And some are required in order to open up chests on other floors. Now let's talk about monsters and how to fight them. Gil has hit points, but you can't see them on screen. When you have your sword out and you run over a monster to defeat it, Gil also loses a bit of his health. It replenishes between floors and with enemies defeated, so it only becomes a real concern if you haven't been collecting items like new swords and armor. An important thing about the monsters is that there are different versions of them. I think this might be the first Famicom game where they palette swap an enemy and give it different abilities. Slimes are the simplest enemy. They're kind of pokey and they jiggle a little bit before they move one square. Some of the tougher slimes can cast spells though. Knights move a lot more quickly and have a shield out. Gil does more damage to them when he hits them in the back too. Wizards are the worst. They appear, cast a spell, and then disappear in a matter of seconds. If you have your sword out and a wizard appears in front of you, you're already dead. You can hit them while they're fading in and out, but it's very difficult to catch the wizards to hit them. More powerful wizards may leave a pillar of fire behind, or could smash through walls. Ghosts are mobile wizards that are invisible unless you have the candle. They can also pass through walls. On later floors, you'll encounter dragons, and of course, Druaga himself. Tower of Druaga is a pretty big game, and it's hard to complete. I recorded for about an hour to get this footage, and I think I wound up at 4:14. I might have been able to make it further if I was willing to abandon the treasures, but I was thinking, how hard could it be? Naturally, Tower of Druaga gets a lot of sequels, but the only one that matters for our purposes is Quest of Kai, a pretty good prequel that we'll be seeing much later. I'm of two minds on Tower of Druaga. I like it conceptually, and I recognize its historical significance, but the rough edges on it are really rough. Having to hold the sword out makes any kind of level with wizards on it just a nightmare. And it's got a bit of a maneuverability problem where you can't easily rotate Gil's facing unless he's in the intersection. Tower of Druaga was a game for a cultural moment, and that moment has passed. I think it's good to check out because it is so significant, but I also think that someone coming to it without nostalgia probably isn't going to get a lot of fun out of it. I'm going to cut to the chase here. I really like Astro Robo Sasa. This is a Famicom-only sequel to an MSX computer game, and it still has that early computer game where they figured out one cool trick and they used it every way possible kind of vibe. It's the first Famicom game by second-tier publisher ASCII. Outside of Japan, they're probably best known for making a lot of accessories. Astro Robo Sasa is all about the robots Sasa and Nana, and their goal to get energy. The robots have a gun, and that gun has some monumental recoil, enough to knock you up into the air and fly you around the screen. Every shot uses up 1 energy, and your goal on each stage is to collect all of the energy tanks, or at least get rid of all of them. You can shoot the tanks, or they can fall to the ground, and that will also get rid of them, but then you don't get the energy. Touching anything mobile will drain your energy really fast. It only takes a couple of touches to drain a full tank's worth of energy. Of course, the laws of physics are against you, and getting into position to collect a tank can be pretty tricky. On the first 3 stages, the energy tanks are suspended by balloons, and this also gives you an idea of how the game is going to progress. There's always 1 stage to introduce the mechanic, a 2nd stage that introduces an additional challenge, and then a 3rd stage that cranks it up all the way. So stage 1 is just the tanks on the balloons, stage 2 introduces the cow, and stage 3 adds flying scissors that can cut the wires holding the tank. The next 3 stages take place at a military base and introduce a wall that has to be destroyed to get the tanks. The later military base stages add attack helicopters that go after you. The 3rd set of stages are the factory. Gravity is much stronger here, so you'll have a hard time getting up. Other robots roam the factory, picking up and putting down things. If they pick up an energy capsule, you can still pick it up, but you're going to hurt yourself on the robot doing that. The robots will also pick up the bodies of their fallen comrades. That's a good way to stop them from carrying around the capsules. If you survive the 3 factory levels, then you're underwater. And now you're buoyant instead of falling down. It's also much harder to position yourself to shoot out those covers on the energy capsules, plus the kelp keeps getting in the way. On the later underwater stages, reaching the top of the screen hurts you. And if you survive the underwater stages, which I couldn't while I was playing earlier, then you go to space for the final levels. So what Astro Robo Sasa is doing is taking the basic concept of using propulsion in 4 directions and some variable physics to give you a real variety of challenges here. The most annoying part of this game is how long it takes to blow apart the walls protecting energy capsules. It can take a long time to get through those, and sometimes you can only get off 1 or 2 shots before you've propelled yourself away from them. When you're playing, don't overlook the fact that you can go off the left-hand side and come back on the right. It's not as safe of a maneuver in this game as it is in some others, but it can help you navigate. Because the threats become so much more dangerous the further you go in Astro Robo Sasa, the key to the game is really building up those energy stores in the first few levels, and then just trying to get out of the later ones with as little damage as possible. It might be better to destroy an energy capsule rather than risk the extra damage collecting it. When you're just playing by yourself, energy capsules give you 100 energy. But when you're playing 2 players, energy capsules give you 250 energy. That gives you the obvious strategy of starting a 2-player game and letting Nana sit down there on the ground by herself, while Sasa flies up and collects energy. You can usually get through the first 3 stages with Nana alive, not doing anything. Doing that will get you 1350 extra energy. If you are playing 2 players, watch out because Nana and Sasa can shoot each other and it hurts a lot. There's one final trick to Astro Robo Sasa, and that's karaoke mode. When you pause the game, it plays Nana's love song. There's lyrics and sheet music for it in the manual. Astro Robo Sasa seems to be regarded as kind of a cult classic in Japan. It wasn't a hugely popular game, but it seems to have a small following these days. And it is pretty good. I wish there was more of it. More varieties of levels, more styles of play. Astro Robo Sasa is a game that deserved to be expanded on. Hey, we finally reached a Shougi game. Hon Shougi Naito Kudan Shougi Hiden, or Real Shougi, Naito 9-Dan's Shougi Secret, is the first console Shougi game. So this was actually a pretty big deal when it was released. Now the thing is, I actually do know how to play Shougi. I used to know someone who was a big chess and Shougi fan, and they taught me how to play. But the thing is, just because I know how to play, doesn't mean I like to play or I'm any good at it. Hon Shougi is about as bare bones of a Shougi game as you can get, so rather than have this be a 2-minute long video, I'm just going to take a couple quick minutes to explain the game. If it perks up your interest, then there's tons of resources out there for you to learn more and play online. Shougi developed from the same root game as chess, so it has a lot of the same features. 2 sides across a grid board. Each piece has its own distinctive set of moves, and the goal is to capture the king. Shougi doesn't have the concept of check or checkmate. When the king can be taken on that move, the game ends. Shougi pieces are these flat pointed tiles, and what direction they're facing is which side they're on. There's 2 aspects of Shougi that make it very distinctive from chess. If a piece advances to the last third of the board, then it can be promoted and turned into another piece by turning it over. The other thing is that captured pieces can be placed back on the board. It just takes your move to pull a piece that you captured and set it down on your side. Shougi pieces tend to have much more limited mobility than chess pieces. Most of them can only move 1 square. Let's go through a quick crash course in piece movement. And I'm going to be using the English names for these pieces. Up front we have the pawns. They can move 1 square forward. In the second row down we have the bishop. One of the most powerful pieces because it can move in unlimited distance in any diagonal direction. On the right-hand side is its counterpart, the rook, who can move an unlimited distance in a cardinal direction. Handy, but less useful than the bishop. Getting into the back row now, in the corners we have the lances, who can move an unlimited distance, but only forward. Beside them are the knights, who can move 2 squares forward, and then 1 square left or right, jumping over the pieces in between. That's not the same as a chess knight. They have to move forward. The silver generals can move to any of the 3 squares in front of them, or diagonally backward a square. The gold general stands beside the king, and can be moved to any square around them except the 2 diagonal backward squares. The gold general cannot be promoted, and any of the pieces that only move 1 square get his movement when they promote. Finally, we have the king, who can move to any square around him. And naturally, the king cannot be promoted. So that's how you play Shougi. Let's talk about Hon Shougi, the video game. It's single player, there is only 1 difficulty level, and the most interesting feature is that you can tell the computer player to wait while it's taking its turn. Otherwise, it's just Shougi. Naito Ninedan, whose name is on the box, was a Shougi master at the time. Ninedan was his rank, which is the highest one available for Shougi grandmasters. The other notable thing about Hon Shougi is the back of the cart. Please do not feed the game to a crocodile. Hon Shougi is an interesting relic, but I don't really think it's worth going back to play. If you want to learn how to play Shougi, there's better options for you. If you want a Famicom Shougi game, we're going to see better ones. And if you actually know how to play Shougi, then this is pretty primitive. Somebody had to be first, and that's pretty significant. But that's the only thing to look for in Hon Shougi. I still don't have a Famicom robot, but if I were to get one, Gyro would be the game that would make me want it. Of the 2 robot games, Gyro is the one that actually has the foundations of a solid game there. The package came with a gyroscope, a motor to spin it up, and a frame for mounting the second player controller into. The spinning gyro could stay balanced on the frame, pushing one of the buttons. In the game, that would change the position of the red or blue pillars, depending on which button was pressed. So this was actually a game I could play by just manipulating the second player controller myself. The thing is, I ran into some technical problems. The buttons didn't always move the pillars as I expected. This happened across 2 carts, 4 controllers, and 2 different systems. Now I know that I've played Gyromite like this in the past, so I'm not really sure what went wrong here. Some kind of system to break the game if the player doesn't use robot inputs? I don't know. Gyro has 3 modes. The first is just a method of controlling the robot, and I actually think it looks better than the one in block. Game A has the player controlling the professor as he tries to disarm all the dynamite in the lab. If you press start, he faces the camera, and then you press a direction to give the robot a command. There are monsters called Smeeks, who wander back and forth. They get distracted by eating the radishes. The professor can pick up a radish and carry it around with him if he needs to do something to block the Smeek. Game A has 40 stages, and as you go on, there are stages that will require a bit of coordination in how you activate and deactivate the buttons. Game B has the professor sleepwalking, and you have to create a path to get him safely home. Some of these stages have 2 exits at the end, and which exit you wind up at determines where you start on the next stage. Game B has 25 stages to it. So I was already uncomfortable giving Gyro a deep look since I don't have the robot, but considering that I can't even control it correctly, I'm going to wrap this one up fast. Gyro seems like a neat little game, and I genuinely would like to try it with the robot at some time. I don't see that happening, though. The robot's just too fragile for me to be willing to pay the prices that it commands. Gyimos was actually one of the reasons I decided to start this project. A few years ago, as I was trying to build my Famicom collection, I had Gyimos on the list and I went, what's this game? And a Google search turned up one video where somebody played it for about 5 minutes and was done. I said to myself, maybe somebody should be documenting some of these more obscure games and giving people better context on them. And it took 4 or 5 years, wavering back and forth, before I actually sat down and did this. But here we are. Now at first blush, you might be looking at those scrolling effects and saying, isn't Geimos just like Exerion? At least you might be saying that if you can even remember that Exerion exists. Geimos is a very different game. Exerion was effectively a single-screen shooter with enemies entering from the top and getting shot down. Geimos attempts a very ambitious pseudo-3D effect, and its mixture of ground and air targets makes it more like Xevious than Exerion. The B button fires your pulsar, the anti-aircraft weapon, and the A button fires your quasar, the anti-ground weapon. There are 6 stages in all that take you across the solar system. I don't think that surface you're flying over looks very much like the moon, but according to the manual's story, in 2315, a group of aliens called Mastodon invaded the solar system using their mothership Phobos. Only the state-of-the-art space fighter Geimos can stop the mothership, but the mothership is equipped with warp engines, and every time it's threatened, it escapes to another planet. The first place you strike is their forward base on the moon. So there we go, those blue strips are the moon. What all of that story amounts to is that you fly over the surface of a planet's satellite, eventually you reach the alien mothership, and you have to shoot its tiny vulnerable point 5 times before it warps away. If it warps, then you go back to the beginning of that level. But if it explodes, then you go to the next planet. Yes, I know that the story said that the mothership escapes. Any death on a level sets you back to the beginning of that level. And while the exact positions that the aliens may enter from are randomized, they are consistent with the waves. There's 6 stages in all, and this is a relatively easy shooter once you know what to do. One strategy page I found recommended dodging over actually attacking, but in my experience that results in too many bullets flying around. Those bullets are a real problem too. Gyimos has a serious issue with not being able to draw everything that it's putting on the screen. So you'll get flicker, but in the really intense situations, it just won't draw things like bullets. If you opened up the ROM and played it once or twice, I can guarantee that you'd get frustrated. The best strategy is really to hit and move. Shoot down who you can, but recognize that there's going to be bullets that you can't see flying at you, and to dodge them preemptively. I tried a rapid-fire controller with Geimos, and that did not work out very well. The number of shots you can generate is pretty limited, and they affect other enemy visibility. You're much better off button mashing for this one. All the footage you've seen so far has been Mode A, and that's because Mode B is a bit weird. It's not a more difficult game version. Well, not intentionally. In Mode A, your ship moves around the screen. In Mode B, the screen moves around your ship. It's disorientating and you can't aim anywhere. It's a real, why would you even put this on here kind of mode. Upon release, Geimos was one of the most expensive Famicom games out there. 5,500 yen for a game was a big ask when there were other games for 4,500 yen. Geimos has a bit of a weird split in reputation in Japan. Half the people seem to call it out as a perfect example of the bad games at the time, and half of them call it out as a secret gem. I gotta say I fall on the side of the people who think it's kinda bad. The mothership is cool, and the graphics of the planets are pretty nifty, but those striped bars give me a headache, and not drawing vital things half the time makes it rough to play. I'll give it points for ambition, and it is better than some of the really awful stuff we've been seeing. but this is another one for completists only. American football is a more common genre on the Famicom than you might think. Most, but not all of these, were developed with the US market in mind. Irem's 10-yard fight is one of those. The port seems to have been commissioned at about the same time as the port of Irem's Spartan X, or Kung Fu Master, and Nintendo released 10-yard fight themselves outside of Japan. The thing is, 10-yard fight turned out to be pretty popular in Japan, despite the sport itself not being popular. I think that's because 10-yard fight isn't really a sports game. It's sports-themed, but it's not a sports game. Instead, Irem has distilled football down to a very simple arcade game. There's no defense, no selection of plays, there's not even a score. All you have to do is get the ball up the field to the end zone, and then you go on to the next level. There's 4 levels of difficulty in 10-yard fight, and you have to do each one twice in order to advance. Start at high school, advance to college, go to the pros, and then finally wind up in the super. Just super, that's all. It actually feels kind of uncomfortable to use football terms to describe 10-yard fight because even with the trappings of football, it plays so differently. So each half, which isn't really a half, starts with a kickoff, and your opportunity to drive the ball as far up the field as you can. After that, you have 4 attempts to drive 10 yards up the field. If you fail, then you wind up going back 10 yards. If you get driven back to your own end zone, well, then you just keep doing it with more required distance added every time. The thing is, in 10-yard fight, the real enemy is the clock. Every time you succeed in gaining at least 10 yards, you get some more time added to that clock. But it runs down fast. If the clock hits 0 and you haven't made it 10 yards, then it's game over. When a play starts, you have one wide receiver who slowly crosses all the way over to the left-hand side. You can hit a button to snap the ball at any time, or if he reaches the far side, then you automatically snap. Once the play starts, you have 2 options. You can hit the A button to throw to that wide receiver, or you can hit the B button while you're pressing in a direction to laterally toss it to one of the 2 running backs you have. If any member of the opposing team is between you and the receiver, the pass is intercepted. You can't toss the ball over their heads. An interception means that you lose 20 yards and get a first down. Since interceptions are so easy to do, and the wide receiver is usually so heavily covered, running plays wind up being overwhelmingly powerful in this game. As you're running down the field and your opponents are trying to tackle you, you can shake them off by jiggling the pad back and forth. I've also found that it's a lot harder for them to tackle you when you're running diagonally. If you get the ball into the end zone, you have the opportunity to score some extra points by kicking for the extra point. The arrow moves and drifts around on its own, so what you'll basically need to do is just snap it when you feel about right, and wait for the arrow to line up so that you'll kick it through the posts. No interception here, so just hit A when it's lined up. After that, it's on to the second half, or the next level. 8-bit football games have a lot of compromises in them. They just didn't have the horsepower to actually simulate the game. 10-yard fight's solution to this was to turn the sport into an arcade game. And I think it's actually kind of okay. It's very primitive, and I wouldn't want to play it for more than a few minutes. But as an arcade game designed to vaguely feel like football, I think it does the job. The first time I encountered Battle City, it was on a pirate game cart, and the pirates had changed out the title screen and redesigned the levels. So I had no idea what this game I was playing was, but I thought it was pretty neat. It wasn't until much later when I encountered Namco's version, and of course that one was even better. Similar to Warpman, Battle City is a kinda sequel, kinda remake to Namco's early arcade game Tank Battalion. It is a more successful reimagining of the game than Warpman was, though. You're driving a tank, and you have to defend your headquarters from other tanks. On every stage, a certain number of tanks will attack, indicated by the markers in the upper right-hand side. The walls are destructible, so both you and enemies can shoot them out. It only takes one shot to destroy the headquarters, though, and that shot can come from an enemy tank or you. Knowing the terrain is important in Battle City. The brick walls are easily destroyed. It only takes 4 shots to get through one full square of them. The stone walls are much tougher, but they can still be destroyed. Forests can be driven or shot through, but they obstruct your vision. No one can drive into water, but it doesn't block shots. And you'll slide on ice, moving 1 additional square once you stop. There's 4 types of enemy tanks that come after you. The light tanks are the easiest to deal with. They're slow, and it only takes 1 shot to destroy them. Armored cars move quickly. The rapid fire tank has a high-speed shell that will outpace yours. Finally, there are the dreaded heavy tanks. They take 4 shots to destroy and change color with every hit. Tanks have a pretty basic movement pattern. Generally, they'll drive in one direction until they hit something, and then randomly choose a new direction. Only 4 enemy tanks can appear on screen at once, and when you destroy one, a new one will blink in up top. The blinking tanks cause power-ups to appear, and those power-ups stay on the field until another blinking tank appears. So it's best to collect them before you destroy any other tanks. Grenades destroy all the enemies on the screen. This includes the heavy tanks, even if they're at full health. Ideally, you'd have 4 enemies on the screen when you collect this. The helmet gives you invulnerability for a few seconds. Good for a frontal assault into that tank fire. The shovel surrounds your base with stone walls. They'll turn back to brick eventually, so you'll still want to go after any tanks that are down close to it. The tank icon's easy enough, it just gives you an extra life. The clock freezes all enemies for a while. That includes the enemies that spawn in after you destroy a frozen enemy, so you can really clean up the map after collecting this. The most complicated power-up is the star. It powers up your tank, and you can do that 3 times. The first power-up gives you a high-speed shell. The second allows you to fire 2 shots instead of 1. And the final level of power-up lets your shots destroy the stone walls in 1 hit. Battle City has 35 maps, and when you start the game, you can select which map you want to begin with. Clearing the 35th map sends you back to map 1 with more difficult enemies. There's also a map editor included with Battle City. You can build whatever you like, and it replaces Stage 1. There's no way to save your maps, though, not even to the data recorder. The final big feature of the game is 2-player mode. It's a simultaneous 2-player, and naturally the players can hurt each other. A few gameplay tips for you. Losing your headquarters is an automatic game over, so protecting it has to be the highest priority, even over clearing out tanks. Watch for choke points on maps where enemies have to pass through. Ideally, you'd be targeting their sides as they roll past. Enemies typically won't turn down side passages, so you can set yourself up to take some easy shots. The power-ups are super good in this game. They're absolutely vital to collect them and use them well. Don't overlook the possibility of shooting out walls to let you target enemy tanks. Battle City has a bit of a weird legacy. Nintendo ported it to the Versus system for an arcade release. I've personally never seen a copy of Versus Battle City. It got a re-release on the Game Boy with additional levels. The Famicom game has become a little bit rare for some reason. In my experience, it's the most expensive Famicom game from before 1987. Of course, in Famicom terms, that means it goes for about 3,000 yen rather than 200 yen. You know, I'm getting the impression that Namco really likes games where people wander around mazes. Battle City is a shooter rather than a maze chase game, but you can kind of see the DNA there. And I think it's a pretty fun game to play. The action's pretty snappy. The huge variety in levels provide a constantly changing challenge. And the level select means you can always just hop in and hop out wherever you like. This is another really good release from Namco. Whew! Made it! Episode 2 to the 6th! Made it all the way to the big 6-4 without skipping a day. Now let me just check what game this episode is for. Oh boy. Well, when you're cataloging all of them, eventually you have to catalog the most popular. How popular was Super Mario Bros. In Japan? Well, it sold 6.8 million copies on the Famicom. By far the best-selling cartridge for the system. Almost double the number of copies sold as the next game. And that was without the benefit of being a pack-in. More so than Donkey Kong or Mario Brothers before it, Super Mario Bros. Changed everything. And as a game that plausibly can compete for the title of most important video game ever made, it's been discussed to death. And that makes it hard for me to find anything novel to say. Did you guys know about the Secret Minus World? I guess the only thing I can really do in this video is talk about myself. I've beaten Super Mario Bros. Twice today. I did a full run without using the warp zones, and then I tried to beat my own record of completing the game in 6 minutes 55 seconds. Yeah, I know I'm 2 minutes behind the world record. I'm just doing this for fun. And that's what Super Mario Bros. Is. It's still fun. 35 years on, and it's still a fun game. I remember as a kid having that big world to explore, and I tried to find every hidden thing in every single place I could. I doubt there's a block in the game I didn't smash at some point, just to see if it had anything. Around my playground, jumping on the turtle's back in 3-1 to get as many lives as you wanted was called turtle topping. I was never any good at it, though. And now, how about a walkthrough of the game with 5 seconds or less on every stage? 1-1, the most famous level in the world. 1-2, still gearing up, but it's the only place where two Goombas stand beside each other. 1-3, I like the more creative aerial layout in this stage. 1-4, I kind of wish they didn't reuse so many level layouts. 2-1, one time I triggered a bug on this stage that turned the vine to green zeros. 2-2, I don't mind the swimming so much, but the suction from those holes is a real drag. 2-3, people seem to hate this stage, but just keep running. 2-4, oh hey, my first death. 3-1, the only place we see water outside of the swimming areas. 3-2, one of the few places you can get a 1-up by kicking a shell. I forgot to do it in my run. 3-3, the arboreal stages are cool, and they really needed more of them in the game. 3-4, some of those firebar jumps are really tricky. 4-1, I used to kill all the Loquitos to try to stop the Spinies, but now I just run past them. 4-2, you knew there had to be a hidden coin brick somewhere in this mess, right? 4-3, woo, mushrooms! 4-4, maze castles were not a fun idea. 5-1, why isn't that a big castle I'm leaving? 5-2, Check out the hidden swimming area! 5-3. The random bullet bills being added to 1-3 don't really make it that much harder. 5-4. Watch out for the giant fire bar. 6-1. I remember there's something here, but I can't quite reach. 6-2. That's a lot of pipes. 6-3. The tight timing on the springs can make this level a bit trickier than it seems. 6-4. Charging through Bowser isn't recommended, but it works. 7-1. That is the worst spring. 7-2. This doesn't even feel that different from 2-2. 7-3. There goes my chance of fireballing Bowser at the end. 7-4. The worst maze castle given the breaks in the path. 8-1. Always ran out of time on this one as a kid, but now I know to keep running. 8-2. The easiest one-up to collect on a hard stage. 8-3. The hardest stage in the game, unless you can deal with the Hammer Brothers. 8-4. So long, King Bowser! So I was playing a bit pokey, trying to collect as much as I could and show off everything I could. Had a few deaths, and it took me about 45 minutes to beat the game like that. Then I beat the game in 6 minutes and 50 seconds. And I would have been faster, except I dropped an input in 8-4 and died. If I can do it, anybody can beat Mario in no time flat. There aren't any real differences between the Famicom and NES versions of Super Mario Bros. I found one significant difference in the manual that wasn't just a translation thing. On the Famicom, they're just called stars, while on the NES, they're called starmen. As for legacy, Super Mario Bros. Casts a longer shadow than anything else released on the Famicom. Just this game has 6 distinct re-releases, not counting things like Virtual Console emulation. Sticking to just the Famicom vintage stuff, Super Mario Bros. Was a launch title for the Famicom Disk System, had a promotional re-release with the characters replaced, had 1 sequel on the Famicom Disk System, and 2 sequels on the Famicom itself. The success of this game led to Mario being the world's most recognizable character. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go see if I can beat that time again.